Welcome, friend. For thousands of years, people have been sitting quietly, with the same question resting in their hearts. Why does the mind never seem to rest? Why do thoughts continue, even when the body is tired? And is it truly possible to find peace within all this movement? Tonight, you are not here to force your mind into silence. You are not here to fix anything or become someone different. You are simply here to listen, to rest, and to allow the words to move through you gently. As you listen, you do not need to concentrate. You do not need to remember everything that is said. Just let the voice carry you like water, carrying fallen leaves downstream. Your body already knows how to rest. Your breath already knows how to breathe. There is nothing you need to do right now. If your mind wanders, that is perfectly fine. Minds wander. That is what they do. Again and again throughout this journey, you will hear a simple reminder. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are not alone in this experience. People long ago noticed the same restless thoughts you notice today. They sat beneath trees, beside rivers, and in quiet rooms watching their minds move. What they discovered was not a way to stop thinking, but a way to live peacefully alongside thought. These stories are not instructions. They are invitations. Invitations to look gently at your own experience and recognize something familiar. As the night deepens, allow yourself to slow down. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw release. Let your breathing become easy and natural. We will begin with a simple story. A story about a traveler. A story about movement restlessness, and a quiet discovery that changes everything. There is no rush. There is nowhere you need to go. Just listen and let the journey unfold. There was once a traveler who believed that peace was something far away. He believed it was a place he had not yet reached, a state he had not yet earned, a destination waiting somewhere beyond the horizon of his current life. For many years, he carried this belief quietly inside himself. It shaped the way he walked, the way he rested, and the way he listened to his own mind. Whenever he felt restless or uneasy, he assumed it meant he had not gone far enough yet. Whenever his thoughts grew loud, he told himself that true peace must exist somewhere else, somewhere better than here. So the traveler began to move. He walked through long stretches of countryside, where the land opened wide and the sky seemed endless. He stayed in small villages for a time, then moved on again, never fully settling. At night, he lay beneath unfamiliar roofs and listened to the sounds of places that were not his own. His body learned how to endure long days of walking. His feet grew strong. His breath became steady. But his mind did not follow so easily. When he sat down to rest, his thoughts followed him. When he closed his eyes, memories rose like mist from the ground. Plans for the future appeared uninvited. Regrets from the past whispered softly but persistently. He noticed that no matter where he went, his mind arrived with him. At first, this frustrated him. He believed that if he traveled far enough, the noise inside him would eventually fade. When it did not, he felt he was failing at something important, though he could not say exactly what. One evening, after a particularly long day, the traveler reached the edge of a wide river. The sun was low in the sky, and its light stretched across the water in slow golden patterns. The air was cool, and the world felt calm in a way that required no effort. The traveler sat down on a smooth stone near the riverbank. For a long time, he did nothing at all. He did not try to meditate. He did not try to think wisely or deeply. He simply watched the water move. The river flowed steadily, never stopping, never repeating itself. Leaves floated past, turning gently as they traveled downstream. Small ripples formed on the surface and vanished almost as soon as they appeared. As the traveler watched, a quiet realization began to form. The river was never still, yet it did not seem troubled by its own movement. The traveler noticed that he did not feel the urge to stop the river. He did not judge it for flowing too fast or too slowly. He did not wish it would become silent or flat. He simply allowed it to be what it was. And then he saw something clearly. His mind was just like this river. Thoughts moved through him the way water moved through the land. They came from somewhere he could not see and flowed toward somewhere he could not follow. Some were light and easy like leaves on the surface. Others felt heavier like deeper currents moving below. He realized that the problem had never been the movement of thought itself. The problem was how tightly he held on to it. Each time a thought appeared, he grabbed it. Each memory pulled him away from the present moment. Each worry carried him far downstream before he even noticed what had happened. As he sat beside the river, something softened inside him. For the first time, he wondered what might happen if he did not jump in. What if he could simply sit on the bank and watch? That night when the traveler lay down to sleep, he tried something different. He did not ask his mind to be quiet. He did not demand peace or stillness. He simply noticed. A thought arose. He saw it. Another thought followed. He saw that too. Some thoughts stayed briefly. Others disappeared almost as soon as they arrived. There was no effort in this watching, no success to achieve, no failure to avoid. The thoughts continued to come, but the struggle around them began to loosen. The traveler felt this change, not as excitement, but as relief. He began to understand something deeply important. Peace was not the absence of thought. Peace was the absence of fighting with thought. In the days that followed, the traveler carried this understanding with him. While walking, he noticed when his mind wandered ahead or behind. While resting, he noticed when memories appeared without warning. Each time he noticed, he returned gently, not by force, not by control, just by remembering where he was. He saw that peace was not something waiting for him at the end of his journey. It was something already present whenever he stopped leaving the moment he was in. The river continued to flow. His thoughts continued to arise, but the traveler no longer felt lost within them. He had learned how to sit on the bank and watch the water pass. And in that simple watching, something steady and quiet revealed itself, something that had been there all along, waiting patiently beneath the movement of the mind. In the days after sitting beside the river, the traveler noticed a quiet change. Nothing dramatic had happened. There was no moment of sudden awakening, no burst of light, no feeling that everything had been solved forever. And yet something was different. The traveler still walked long distances. He still slept in unfamiliar places. His thoughts still appeared just as they always had. But now there was a little more space around them. When a memory arose, it no longer pulled him away so quickly. When a worry appeared, it did not immediately demand his full attention. He began to see thoughts as movements rather than commands. One morning, as the traveler walked along a narrow path through open land, he noticed his mind drifting far ahead. It was planning where he would go next, imagining places he had not yet seen. Then gently he noticed this drifting. He felt his feet touching the ground. He heard the sound of the wind moving through tall grass. Without effort, he returned to where he already was. This returning felt simple, almost ordinary, and yet it carried a quiet strength. The traveler began to understand that every moment of noticing was already enough. He did not need to hold on to awareness. He did not need to maintain it perfectly. Each time he noticed that his mind had wandered, that noticing itself was the practice. Some days his mind felt calm and open. On those days, walking felt light. Breathing felt easy. Other days, his mind felt heavy and restless. Thoughts arrived in quick succession, overlapping and pulling in different directions. On those days, the traveler did not scold himself. He remembered the river. The river did not flow differently on calm days and stormy days. It simply flowed. So the traveler allowed his mind to be as it was. Calm when it was calm. Restless when it was restless. He saw that resisting restlessness only made it stronger, but allowing it without feeding it allowed it to pass. One evening, the traveler stayed in a small village and met an elderly man sitting quietly outside his home. They sat together for a while without speaking. After some time, the traveler asked, "How do you find peace when the mind never seems to stop?" The old man smiled gently and replied, "I stopped asking it to stop." The traveler felt something settle inside him when he heard those words. That night, as he lay down to sleep, thoughts came again. Images from the day appeared. Snippets of conversation replayed themselves. But instead of following them, the traveler rested his attention on the simple feeling of lying down, the weight of his body against the ground, the rise and fall of his breath. Thoughts came, thoughts went, and somewhere in between, sleep arrived naturally. Over time, the traveler began to trust this gentle way of being. He no longer believed that peace required perfect conditions. He no longer waited for his thoughts to disappear before allowing himself to rest. He learned that peace was something revealed, not created. It appeared whenever he stopped arguing with his experience. As he continued his journey, the traveler noticed moments of quiet joy, not excitement, not pleasure that depended on anything happening, just a sense of ease. He realized that he had been searching for peace as if it were something separate from life. But peace was not found outside movement, it was found within it. The river still flowed, the path still unfolded, thoughts still arose and passed away. But the traveler no longer felt carried helplessly by them. He walked with the river inside him, not against it. And as the journey continued, he no longer searched for an ending. He learned how to be present for each step, each breath, each quiet moment of noticing. The traveler understood now that peace was never waiting at the destination. It was always here, quietly available, each time he chose not to jump into the river of thought, but to sit gently on its bank and watch the water pass. And so the traveler continued on his path, not searching anymore, but simply walking. Not trying to escape his thoughts, but learning how to live beside them. The river stayed with him, not as a place, but as an understanding. Thoughts would keep moving. Life would keep unfolding. Nothing needed to stop for peace to be present. Yet as gentle as this realization was, another truth remained. The mind does not always move calmly like a wide river. Sometimes it rushes, sometimes it tumbles, sometimes it feels loud, chaotic, and overwhelming. You may know this feeling well. You lie down to rest, but your mind refuses to slow. Thoughts collide with one another. Worries pile up. Memories replay themselves again and again. This too is part of the human experience. It has always been this way. Long before our time, people noticed the same restless movement inside their own minds. They sat quietly and watched thoughts pour through them without pause, and they found a powerful image to describe it. They called it the waterfall mind. In the next story, we will explore this image together, not to judge the mind for being restless, not to fix it or silence it, but to understand it. And in understanding, to discover a gentler way of resting within its flow. For now, take a slow breath. Let your body soften. There is nothing you need to do. Just listen as the journey continues. There are moments when the mind feels less like a river and more like something far more intense. Moments when thoughts do not simply pass by but rush, collide, and tumble over one another without pause. You may recognize this experience. You sit down hoping to rest, yet inside everything speeds up. Thoughts stack on top of thoughts. One worry leads to another. A memory pulls in a regret. A regret turns into a fear about what might come next. It can feel overwhelming, as if there is no space to breathe. Long ago, people noticed this same experience within themselves. They sat quietly, just as people do now, and watched their minds carefully. They did not judge what they saw. They simply observed, and they found a powerful image. They said, "The untrained mind is like a waterfall. Imagine standing near a waterfall in nature. You hear it before you see it. A constant roar filling the air, water rushing downward with unstoppable force. When you finally see it, the movement is endless. Water pours over the edge again and again, never stopping, never slowing. Mist rises and fills the space around you. Everything feels alive, powerful, and slightly overwhelming. No matter how long you stand there, the waterfall does not pause. It does not wait for you. It does not ask permission to keep flowing. This is what the mind can feel like at times. Thoughts tumble endlessly. One idea crashes into the next. Before you know it, you are far from where you began. You may try to stop it. You may try to control it. But just like a real waterfall, the harder you try to stop it, the more exhausting it becomes. The teachers who spoke of the waterfall mind were not criticizing the mind. They were describing it honestly. The mind moves because it is alive. It thinks because that is its nature. There is nothing wrong with this. The suffering comes from misunderstanding the waterfall, from believing that it should behave differently, from standing beneath it and wondering why you are getting wet. When thoughts rush through us, we often react with frustration. Why can't I calm down? Why won't my mind be quiet? What is wrong with me? These questions add another layer of struggle. The waterfall was never the problem. Standing in its full force without understanding it was. Imagine now that instead of standing directly beneath the waterfall, you step back slightly. You still hear it. You still see the water rushing, but you are no longer being pounded by it. This small change makes all the difference. In the same way, when thoughts rush through the mind, the practice is not to stop them. It is to step back just enough to see what is happening. Oh, the mind is rushing right now. That is what it is doing. No blame, no judgment, just recognition. When you recognize the waterfall mind, something subtle shifts. You are no longer completely inside the rush. You are beginning to observe it. This observation does not make the thoughts disappear. The water keeps falling. The noise continues. But your relationship to it changes. Instead of being lost in the roar, you are aware of it. This awareness creates space. Not a large space, not a dramatic one, just enough. Enough to breathe, enough to rest a little. The ancient teachers discovered that peace does not come from stopping the waterfall. Peace comes from understanding where to stand. When you try to silence the mind during these moments, you often feel like you are failing, but you are not failing. You are simply standing too close. The mind rushing does not mean something is wrong. It means the mind is active. Everyone experiences this. Every human being who has ever tried to rest has met the waterfall mind. Knowing this can be deeply comforting. You are not alone in this experience. You are not broken. You are not doing anything wrong. You are simply human. When the waterfall mind appears, the invitation is gentle. Notice the movement. Notice the speed. Notice the intensity. And instead of fighting it, allow yourself to step back. This stepping back is not physical. It is an inner shift. From being inside the thoughts to being aware of them. From being carried by the water to watching it fall. You may find that the mind continues to rush for a while. That is okay. Waterfalls do not stop instantly. But something inside you begins to relax. Not because the mind is quiet, but because you are no longer arguing with its nature. This is the beginning of peace within the waterfall, not by control, not by force, but by understanding. And in the next part, we will explore how this simple recognition becomes a powerful practice, a way of working with even the most restless moments of the mind with patience, kindness, and ease. When the mind rushes like a waterfall, there is often a hidden habit beneath the struggle. We believe that peace should feel quiet. We assume that calm means the absence of movement. So when thoughts accelerate, we conclude that peace is impossible in that moment. But the ancient teachers discovered something surprising. Peace does not require the waterfall to stop. It requires a different way of meeting it. Consider what happens when you stand near a waterfall for a long time. At first, the noise feels overwhelming. The body tenses, the ears strain, the mind reacts. But if you remain still, something changes. The body adapts. The sound becomes part of the background. What once felt chaotic becomes steady. The waterfall has not changed. You have. The same is true of the mind. When thoughts rush, we often tighten. The jaw clenches, the shoulders lift, the breath becomes shallow. This tightening is not caused by thoughts themselves. It is caused by resistance. We resist the noise. We resist the speed. We resist the feeling of losing control. But what if just for a moment you allowed the waterfall to be loud, not approving of it, not liking it, just allowing it? The teachers spoke of this as a gentle turning toward experience rather than away from it. And instead of asking, "How do I stop this?" they suggested asking, "Can I stay with this?" Staying does not mean following the thoughts. It does not mean analyzing them or solving them. It simply means knowing that they are happening. Oh, this is a fast mind right now. Oh, this is a busy moment. That is all. This simple acknowledgement can feel almost too small to matter, but it changes the entire relationship. When you stop demanding silence, the mind no longer needs to fight you. When you stop insisting on calm, the body begins to soften on its own. The waterfall keeps falling, but you are no longer standing directly beneath it. There is another important discovery the teachers made. They noticed that thoughts rush most intensely when we believe we must do something about them. A problem appears in the mind. Immediately, the mind accelerates, it searches, it plans, it replays. This happens automatically. But when you recognize this process, you gain a small pause. Not enough to stop the waterfall, but enough to choose where you stand. In that pause, you might gently return to something simple. The feeling of the breath entering the body, the sensation of the ground beneath you, the weight of your body resting where it is. These are not distractions, they are anchors. Anchors do not stop the water from moving, they simply keep you from being swept away. And if the mind keeps rushing, you can still rest with your anchor. You can let the breath be steady, even when thoughts are not. You can let the body relax, even when the mind feels loud. This is not pretending. It is simply remembering that awareness is larger than the rush. You may notice that the waterfall mind tries to pull you back in again and again. A thought will say, "This is urgent." Another will say, "You must fix this right now." If you believe them, the current grows stronger. But if you recognize them as just more water falling, the pull weakens. The practice is not to win against the waterfall. The practice is to stop feeding it with fear. Many people wait for the mind to settle before allowing themselves to relax. But the teachers discovered the opposite works far better. Relax first. Let the mind do what it does. Over time, something interesting happens. When the body is no longer tense, the mind begins to slow naturally. Not because it is forced, but because it is no longer being resisted. Waterfalls soften when they reach wider ground. The same is true inside. There will still be moments when thoughts rush intensely, moments when worries stack up, moments when the mind feels loud and restless. These moments are not failures, they are invitations. Invitations to practice standing differently. Instead of asking for silence, you learn to ask for space. Instead of control, you learn curiosity. Instead of fighting the waterfall, you learn to listen without drowning. This listening does not require effort. It requires trust. Trust that you do not need to fix the mind to be at peace. Trust that awareness itself is enough. And slowly, gently, peace begins to show itself. Not as stillness, but as steadiness. A steadiness that remains even while the water keeps falling. This is the peace the teachers spoke of. Not the absence of movement, but the presence of understanding. And from here, the journey continues. And you can test this in the simplest place of all, in bed. If thoughts race as you try to sleep, do not wrestle them. Let them rush in the background like water in the distance, while you rest with one slow breath after another. When the need to grasp experience softens, experience begins to reveal itself gently and without effort. Long ago, in a quiet village, there lived a person whose work required patience above all else. This person was an arrow maker. Each day they sat in a small workshop, filled with the scent of wood and the soft sound of tools moving slowly against rough surfaces. Light entered through a single window, falling gently across the workbench. Nothing here was hurried. Nothing was rushed. The arrow maker began each arrow with a piece of wood that was far from perfect. It was bent in places, uneven, sometimes twisted slightly to one side. To an untrained eye, the wood looked unusable. But the arrow maker did not see a problem. They saw material. They never became angry at the wood for being crooked. They never asked why it was not already straight. They understood that this was simply the nature of raw wood. So they began. With slow, careful movements, the arrow maker shaved away rough edges. They pressed the wood gently against a stone, smoothing it bit by bit. There was no force, no sudden corrections, just steady attention. A little work here, a little work there. If the wood resisted, the arrow maker did not push harder. They adjusted their angle. They waited. They listened with their hands. Over time, something changed. The wood did not transform all at once. There was no clear moment when it suddenly became straight. But gradually, almost invisibly, the shape shifted. The crooked places softened. The bends eased. What had once been uneven began to align. The arrow maker trusted the process. They knew that impatience would ruin the work. Too much pressure would snap the wood. Too much force would destroy what could have been shaped. This work required kindness. One day a traveler passed through the village and stopped to watch. They stood quietly in the doorway, observing the slow rhythm of the work. After some time, the traveler asked, "Why do you take so long with each arrow?" The arrow maker looked up and smiled. "If I rush," they said, "I fight the wood. If I move slowly, I work with it." The traveler stayed with those words. Later that evening, as the traveler rested, they thought about their own mind. How often they had tried to force it into shape. How often they had grown frustrated when thoughts refused to behave. They realized something important. They had been angry at the wood. Each time their mind wandered, they treated it as a failure. Each time a thought returned, they judged themselves harshly. They pushed, they scolded, they demanded. And just like fragile wood under too much pressure, the mind resisted. The next day, the traveler returned to the workshop and watched again. They noticed how the arrow maker paused often, how they adjusted gently rather than correcting aggressively. Nothing about the work felt tense. The traveler began to understand that training the mind might be similar. Not a battle, not a struggle, but a careful shaping. The mind, like the wood, arrives imperfect. It wanders. It bends toward habits it has learned over many years. Expecting it to be straight from the beginning is unrealistic. Getting angry at it accomplishes nothing. The arrow maker never blamed the wood for being crooked. They simply worked with what was there. That night, the traveler tried to bring this same attitude inward. When a thought appeared, they noticed it. When the mind wandered, they acknowledged it. There was no sharp correction, just a gentle return. They saw that each return was like a small movement of the tool, almost insignificant on its own, but meaningful when repeated with care. The traveler realized that shaping the mind did not require force, it required patience. The arrow maker trusted that if they continued the work gently, the arrow would become true. The traveler began to trust the same about the mind. There was no need to finish today, no need to succeed immediately. The work could unfold slowly, and for the first time, the traveler felt what it meant to work with the mind instead of against it. In the days that followed, the traveler carried the image of the arrow maker everywhere. It stayed with him as he walked, It stayed with him as he rested, and most of all, it stayed with him when his mind wandered. He began to notice how quickly impatience appeared. A thought would arise, and almost immediately there would be tension. An inner voice would say that the mind should be quieter, that it should be better by now, that something was wrong. Before, he had believed this voice. Now he paused. He remembered the workshop, the slow hands, the gentle shaping. He saw that impatience itself was another crooked place in the wood. Not a problem to fight, just another place to work carefully. One morning, the traveler sat quietly beneath a tree. Birds moved through the branches above him. The ground beneath him felt solid and cool. At first, his mind was busy. Thoughts about the day ahead appeared. Images of places he had been drifted through. Worries surfaced without warning. The old habit returned. The urge to fix, the urge to control. But this time he noticed it. Oh, he thought, this is the part of me that wants to rush. Instead of pushing the thoughts away, he softened. He let his shoulders drop. He allowed his breath to move naturally. The thoughts did not stop, but something else changed. The tension around them eased. He began to see that the practice was not about preventing thoughts from arising. It was about how he met them. Each moment of noticing was like a small pass of the tool over the wood. Each gentle return was like smoothing a rough edge. No single moment mattered very much. What mattered was the attitude. If he was harsh, the work became painful. If he was patient, the work continued naturally. Later that day, the traveler returned once more to the village. He found the arrow maker finishing a piece of work. The arrow lay on the bench straight and balanced. The traveler asked, "How do you know when the arrow is finished?" The arrow maker considered this for a moment. "When it no longer resists," they replied, "when it rests easily in the hand." The traveler felt the meaning of these words settle deeply. He saw that a well-trained mind was not rigid. It was not forced into silence. It was at ease with itself. That evening, as the traveler lay down to rest, thoughts came again. Some were light, some were heavy. But he no longer treated them as enemies. When the mind wandered, he noticed it. When it returned, he noticed that too. There was no judgment, no score being kept. He understood now that the wandering was not a mistake. The noticing was the practice. Over time, the traveler began to feel a quiet confidence. Not confidence that the mind would always be calm, but confidence that he knew how to work with whatever arose. Some days the mind felt smooth and steady. Other days it felt rough and uneven. Both were part of the process. Just as the arrow maker accepted every piece of wood as it arrived, the traveler learned to accept each moment of mind as it was. Nothing needed to be rejected. Nothing needed to be rushed. He realized that training the mind was not a project with an endpoint. It was an ongoing relationship, a relationship built on attention, on patience, on kindness. As he continued his journey, the traveler no longer demanded perfection from himself. He no longer expected the mind to behave in a certain way. Instead, he showed up again and again. Each moment of awareness became an act of care. Each gentle return became a sign of understanding. The arrow maker continued their work in the village. The traveler continued his path through the world, and though they walked different roads, they shared the same quiet truth. What is shaped with patience becomes strong. What is met with kindness learns to rest. That quiet does not end anything. It simply opens into another depth where clarity needs no explanation. After leaving the village of the Arrowmaker, the traveler noticed something subtle beginning to change. It was not the absence of thought. It was not a permanent calm. It was awareness. Thoughts still arose as they always had. Plans appeared. Memories surfaced. Concerns returned in familiar patterns. But now the traveler was beginning to see them sooner, before thoughts would arrive quietly and take control without being noticed. They would pull him far away before he realized he had left the present moment. Now there were moments when he caught them in the act. A thought would appear, and instead of being lost inside it, he would see it happening. This noticing felt gentle, almost like waking up from a dream and realizing where you are. One afternoon, the traveler sat beside a narrow path, resting. The air was warm. The world felt still. As he sat, a thought arose about where he should go next. Normally, this thought would have carried him into long planning, but this time something different happened. He noticed it. Oh, he realized there is thinking. The thought stayed for a moment. Then it faded. Another thought followed. He noticed that one too. For the first time, the traveler clearly saw that thoughts did not arrive as solid things. They came. They stayed briefly. They left. Like birds landing on a branch and then flying away. This discovery felt important. He had always assumed that thoughts were problems to be solved. Now he saw that they were events to be noticed. Over the next days, he practiced this simple noticing again and again. While walking, he noticed when his mind wandered ahead. While eating, he noticed when his attention drifted elsewhere. While resting, he noticed when memories replayed themselves. Each time he noticed, he returned, not forcefully, not with frustration, just gently. Sometimes the noticing happened quickly. Sometimes he was lost for a long time before he realized it. Both were part of the practice. The traveler began to understand that noticing was not something he could control perfectly. It was something that happened naturally when he was present. He did not need to hunt for thoughts. He did not need to watch the mind aggressively. He simply needed to recognize when thinking was happening. One evening, as he prepared to sleep, his mind became busy again. Thoughts about the day appeared. Images of people he had met passed through his awareness. At first, he felt the familiar urge to quiet the mind. Then he remembered. He noticed the urge itself. Oh, he thought there is wanting the mind to be different. That noticing softened something inside him. The thoughts continued, but the struggle eased. He realized that noticing was not about stopping anything. It was about seeing clearly what was already happening. The traveler also noticed something else. When he judged his thoughts, they became heavier. When he noticed them without judgment, they lost their grip. Judgment added weight. Awareness created space. This understanding brought relief. He no longer needed to evaluate each thought. He did not need to decide whether it was good or bad. He only needed to see it. Thoughts he saw did not require permission to appear, but they also did not require engagement. They could be allowed to come and go. The traveler began to trust this simple practice, noticing, returning again and again. There was no finish line, no perfect state to reach. Just this ongoing relationship with the present moment. As he continued his journey, he realized that awareness itself was steady even when thoughts were not. It was always there, quietly observing. And for the first time, he understood that peace did not depend on the mind becoming still. It depended on learning how to notice without being carried away. As the traveler continued to practice noticing, he began to see something even more subtle. Not only did thoughts come and go, but the moment of noticing them had a distinct feeling. It felt like waking up. There was a small shift, almost invisible, yet unmistakable. One moment he was inside a thought. The next he was aware that thinking was happening. This shift did not feel dramatic. It did not feel powerful. It felt quiet and ordinary, and yet everything depended on it. The traveler began to realize that most of his life had been spent inside thoughts without knowing it. Thinking felt so natural, so familiar, that he had mistaken it for reality itself. He believed every story the mind told simply because he did not know there was another option. Now, with practice, that option was becoming clearer. One morning, as he walked through open land, a familiar worry appeared. It spoke in a convincing voice, listing problems and possible outcomes. Before, this worry would have pulled him into hours of mental activity. This time he noticed it sooner. Oh, he realized this is worry. The word was not used to analyze. It was not used to judge. It was simply a recognition. The worry continued for a moment. Then, without effort, it softened. The traveler was surprised. He had not argued with the worry. He had not solved it. He had not pushed it away. He had simply known it. This taught him something important. Thoughts draw their strength from being unnoticed. When they operate in the dark, they feel solid and unquestionable. When they are seen clearly, they begin to lose their grip. The traveler noticed that this applied to all kinds of thoughts, plans, memories, self-criticism, even pleasant fantasies. Whenever he became lost in them, he felt pulled away from himself. Whenever he noticed them, he felt present again. Noticing became a kind of returning home. There were days when the traveler forgot this completely. Days when he was lost for long stretches of time. When he suddenly realized he had been thinking for hours. At first, this embarrassed him. Then he remembered the lesson of the arrow maker. Harshness would only deepen the habit. Kindness would allow the work to continue. So when he noticed that he had been lost, he did not scold himself. He did not say he was bad at this. He simply acknowledged the moment of waking up. Oh, he thought, I am here again. That was enough. He saw that the practice was not about staying aware forever. It was about returning again and again. Each return strengthened something quiet inside him. Not control, not discipline, trust. Trust that awareness would always be there when he noticed. Trust that he did not need to force anything. The traveler also began to notice how gentle awareness felt in the body. When he was lost in thought, the body often felt tight, the breath shallow, the shoulders tense. When he noticed, the body softened, the breath deepened. Not because he made it happen, but because resistance fell away. Awareness allowed the body to rest. This discovery changed the way he related to himself. He no longer treated his mind as a problem to be fixed. He treated it as something to be understood. Thoughts were no longer enemies. They were visitors. Some stayed briefly, some lingered, all eventually left. The traveler understood now that noticing was not a technique. It was a relationship. A relationship built on curiosity rather than judgment. on patience rather than control. As he moved forward on his journey, this relationship continued to deepen. He noticed thoughts earlier. He returned more gently. He rested more often in simple presence. And though the mind still wandered as minds always do, the traveler no longer felt lost within it. He had learned the quiet art of noticing, and in that noticing he found a steady place to stand, no matter what passed through his mind. And within that clarity, a subtler movement starts to become visible, unfolding just beneath the surface of thought. As the traveler grew more familiar with noticing his thoughts, a new question quietly appeared. If awareness could return again and again, what exactly was it returning to? What was this place he kept arriving at when he noticed he had wandered? The answer revealed itself slowly through ordinary moments. One morning, the traveler woke before the sun had fully risen. The world was quiet. The air felt cool and still. For a few moments, he lay there without thinking about anything at all. There was only the feeling of the ground beneath him, the gentle movement of his breath, the faint sound of birds beginning their day. And then a thought appeared. As soon as it did, the traveler noticed it. In that moment of noticing, he felt something simple and clear. He felt present. It was not a special state. It did not feel dramatic or elevated. It felt ordinary, steady, and real. The traveler began to understand that this presence was always here. It was what he returned to each time he noticed his mind had wandered. Later that day, as he walked through a small town, he saw a wooden sign fixed to a post near a crossroads. It showed a simple map of the surrounding area. At the center of the map, there was a small mark with words beneath it. "You are here." The traveler stopped and looked at the sign for a long time. Something about those words touched him deeply. You are here. Not where you were before, not where you might go next. Here. He realized that this was exactly what awareness was doing. Each time he noticed thinking, awareness was quietly saying the same thing. You are here. The traveler saw how often he was not here. While walking, his mind was already ahead. While resting, his thoughts replayed the past. While speaking with others, part of his attention drifted elsewhere. His body was present, but his mind was often far away. Mindfulness, he now understood, was simply remembering where he was. It was not about creating a special experience. It was not about forcing attention to stay in one place. It was the gentle act of coming back. The traveler began to practice this remembering throughout his day. While walking, he felt his feet touch the ground. While eating, he noticed the taste of his food. While sitting, he felt the weight of his body where it rested. Again and again, the mind wandered. Again and again, he returned. Each return felt like a small homecoming. He noticed something important. The present moment did not need improvement. It did not need explanation. It was complete as it was. Even when the moment was uncomfortable, even when the body was tired, even when emotions were difficult. Being here did not mean everything felt pleasant. It meant everything was allowed to be felt. One afternoon, the traveler sat by the side of the road resting. His body felt weary from walking. A sense of impatience arose. Normally, this impatience would have turned into complaints and judgments. But this time, he noticed it. Oh, he thought impatience is here. He felt it in the body, a tightness, a restlessness, and instead of pushing it away, he stayed present with it. The impatience did not disappear immediately, but it no longer felt overwhelming. By staying here, he was no longer fighting his experience. The traveler realized that remembering the present moment was not about escaping difficulty. It was about meeting it honestly. There were moments when being here felt peaceful. There were moments when it felt uncomfortable. Both were part of life. Mindfulness was not choosing one over the other. It was choosing not to leave. As evening came, the traveler lay down to rest. Thoughts appeared, as they always did. Plans, memories, random images drifting through the mind. Instead of following them, he remembered the sign. You are here. He felt the bed beneath him, the rhythm of his breathing, the quiet of the night. Thoughts continued, but he did not need to go with them. He saw that the present moment was always available, even in the middle of thinking, even in the middle of restlessness. You are here. These words were not instructions. They were reminders that life was happening now, not in the thoughts about it, not in the stories of before or after. Here. The traveler understood that mindfulness was not something added to life. It was simply life noticed, and each time he remembered where he was, he returned to something steady, something real, something that did not need to be changed. As the traveler continued practicing this simple remembering, he began to notice how often he forgot. Not in a dramatic way, not with obvious mistakes, but in small, quiet moments that passed unnoticed. He would begin walking with awareness, feeling each step clearly. Then, without warning, the mind would drift. A thought about the future would appear. An image from the past would surface, and suddenly he was somewhere else. At first, this forgetting frustrated him. He believed that once he understood the idea of being present, it should stay with him. He thought mindfulness was something he could hold on to, but slowly experience taught him otherwise. One afternoon, while sitting in the shade, the traveler remembered something simple. Forgetting was not a failure. It was part of the rhythm. Just as breathing moves in and out, awareness moves in and out of the present moment. The mind wanders, and then it returns. This returning, he realized, was not a mistake to be corrected. It was the practice itself. Each time he noticed he had wandered, something gentle happened. There was a soft moment of recognition, a quiet return. Oh, he thought, I am here again. That was enough. The traveler began to treat forgetting with more kindness. Instead of criticizing himself, he began to see forgetting as an invitation to return. He noticed that awareness did not arrive through effort. It arrived through honesty. Whenever he admitted I was lost, awareness was already present. The very act of noticing meant he was no longer lost. This understanding changed his relationship with the practice. He stopped trying to stay present forever. He stopped measuring how long awareness lasted. Instead, he trusted the process. One evening, the traveler walked through a quiet field as the light faded. The sky shifted slowly from blue to deep purple. His body felt tired. A thought appeared about how far he still had to go. Then another thought followed, and another. Soon he realized he had been walking for some time without noticing anything at all. When awareness returned, it did not come with blame. It came with simplicity. I am here. He felt the ground beneath his feet. He felt the cool air against his skin. The field returned. Nothing had been lost. This taught him something important. The present moment never goes away. Only attention leaves, and attention always knows how to come back. The traveler also noticed that mindfulness did not require perfect conditions. It did not require silence. It did not require solitude. He practiced while walking through crowded places. He practiced while waiting. He practiced while listening to others speak. Sometimes he forgot completely. Sometimes he remembered quickly. Both were part of the same path. He realized that mindfulness was not a state to achieve. It was a relationship to maintain. A relationship built on remembering and forgetting, on leaving and returning. There was a softness in this understanding that felt deeply human. One night, as the traveler lay down to sleep, his mind became busy. Thoughts moved quickly. Plans for tomorrow appeared. Small worries surfaced. In the past, this would have created frustration. Now he recognized the familiar pattern. Oh, he thought the mind is active tonight. Instead of trying to stop it, he returned to something simple. The feeling of the bed beneath him, the slow rhythm of breathing. Thoughts continued, but he did not chase them. He remembered that being present did not mean being thought-free. It meant being honest about what was happening. If thinking was happening, he knew it. If restlessness was present, he felt it. This knowing was enough. As the traveler drifted towards sleep, he felt a sense of safety. Not because everything was quiet, but because he no longer felt lost inside his experience. He understood now that mindfulness was not about controlling the mind. It was about remembering life as it unfolded, moment by moment, sometimes clearly, sometimes dimly, but always returnable. As the journey continued, this gentle remembering became a steady companion. Not something he carried with effort, something that met him whenever he noticed. And in that noticing again and again, he found himself right where he needed to be. Here. Not every change announces itself. Some only become clear after we realize we are no longer standing where we once were. As the traveler grew more familiar with remembering the present moment, he began to notice a different kind of restlessness. It was not only the movement of thoughts, it was a subtle leaning forward, a tendency to live slightly ahead of where he actually was. He saw this most clearly while walking. His feet touched the ground step by step, but his mind was already reaching for the next place, where he would stop, what he would do after, how far he still had to go. Even when he was aware, part of him was leaning into the future. One afternoon, the traveler met a guide who taught people how to climb. Not tall mountains, but stone paths and low rock faces where balance mattered more than strength. The traveler watched as the guide worked with beginners. Again and again, the guide repeated the same instruction. Stay over your feet. At first, the words seemed obvious. Of course you stay over your feet when you walk or climb. What else would you do? But as the traveler watched more closely, he began to understand. When people climbed, they often leaned forward too soon. They reached for the next hold before their body was ready. They shifted their weight ahead of their foundation. And when they did, they lost balance. The guide corrected them gently, not by shouting, not by forcing, just by reminding them. Come back, stay over your feet. The traveler felt something inside him respond to these words. That evening, as he walked alone, he tried to apply the instruction inwardly. He noticed how often his attention leaned forward, how often his mind left the body behind. When he caught this, he gently returned to the sensation of his feet touching the earth. The pressure, the movement, the contact. Staying over his feet felt grounding, steady, safe. He realized that much of his unease came from living ahead of himself, from stepping into the next moment before fully arriving in this one. This habit was not limited to walking. While eating, he thought about what he would do next. While resting, he planned the day ahead. While listening to others, he prepared his response instead of hearing their words. He was rarely fully where he was. The traveler began to see that this leaning forward created tension. The body felt slightly off balance, the breath shallow. When he stayed over his feet, something settled. This did not mean the future disappeared. Plans still existed. Responsibilities still mattered. But he no longer needed to live inside them constantly. The guide's instruction became a quiet mantra. Stay over your feet. It meant stay with what is actually happening. Stay with the body. Stay with the ground beneath you. One morning, the traveler sat quietly and noticed how his mind leaned into the future almost immediately. A thought appeared about what needed to be done later. Then another followed. Instead of chasing them, he returned to the feeling of sitting, the weight of his body, the contact with the ground. He stayed there. At first, the mind resisted. It wanted to move ahead. It wanted to plan. But when he did not follow, the urgency softened. The traveler realized that staying present did not mean ignoring the future. It meant not abandoning the present for it. He also noticed how often anxiety was connected to leaning forward. Worry lived almost entirely in the future. Fear imagined what had not yet happened. When he stayed over his feet, anxiety had less room to grow. The traveler practiced this throughout the day. When impatience arose, he returned to the body. When frustration appeared, he grounded himself in sensation. This practice did not eliminate difficulty, but it changed his relationship to it. He was no longer constantly reaching, no longer bracing for what came next. He trusted that the next step would reveal itself when it arrived. Staying over his feet felt like trusting life, trusting that he did not need to rush ahead to be safe. As night came, the traveler lay down to rest. Thoughts appeared about tomorrow. Plans surfaced. He noticed the familiar forward pull. Gently, he returned to the present moment, to the bed beneath him, to the rhythm of breathing. He stayed where he was, and in doing so, he felt a deeper sense of rest. Not because the mind was quiet, but because he was no longer leaning away from himself. Staying over his feet became a way of living, a way of meeting each moment without rushing past it. And as the traveler continued his journey, he began to understand that balance was not found by moving faster, but by fully arriving where he already stood. As the traveler continued practicing staying over his feet, he began to notice how deeply this habit of leaning forward was woven into his life. It was not just a mental tendency. It was something the body had learned over many years. Even when he tried to rest, part of him remained slightly tense. The muscles held a quiet readiness. The breath stayed just a little shallow, as if something important might happen at any moment and he needed to be prepared. He saw now that this constant readiness was exhausting. One evening, the traveler sat beside a small fire as darkness settled around him. The flames moved, gently rising and falling with no urgency. He watched them for a long time. He noticed how the fire did not lean forward. It burned exactly where it was. It did not rush to become something else. Sitting there, he felt how often he had lived as if the present moment were only a bridge to the next one, as if now were never enough on its own. Staying over his feet began to feel like an invitation to stop postponing his life. The traveler experimented with this in small ways. When he drank water, he drank it fully without thinking about what came next. When he washed his hands, he felt the temperature and movement of the water. When he paused to rest, he allowed the pause to be complete. Again and again, the mind tried to pull him forward, and again he noticed. Each noticing was a quiet return. Not a correction, not a command, just a reminder. I am here. He realized that staying over his feet was not about freezing in place. It was about letting action arise naturally from presence instead of urgency. When it was time to move, he moved. When it was time to stop, he stopped. Nothing needed to be forced. The traveler also noticed how this practice changed his interactions with others. When someone spoke to him, he felt the urge to prepare a response. He noticed the forward lean of attention instead of following it. He stayed. He listened. The conversation slowed. He heard more. He responded more honestly. Staying over his feet allowed him to meet people where they were not, where his thoughts rushed ahead. There were moments when this felt uncomfortable. Staying present meant feeling uncertainty. It meant not knowing what would happen next. Leaning into the future had once given him a sense of control. Staying present asked him to trust. This trust did not come easily. Some days anxiety returned strongly. Thoughts about what might go wrong crowded his mind. The body tightened. When this happened, he remembered the instruction. Stay over your feet. He felt the ground beneath him. He noticed the weight of his body. He let the breath move as it wanted. The anxiety did not disappear immediately, but it no longer carried him away. He could be with it. The traveler began to see that balance was not a fixed state. It was something continually renewed. Each moment asked the same quiet question. Where are you standing right now? Sometimes he was ahead of himself. Sometimes he was lost in memory. And sometimes he was simply here. None of these moments needed judgment. When he noticed he had leaned forward, he returned. When he noticed he had fallen behind, he returned. The return itself was enough. One night as he prepared to sleep, the traveler felt the familiar pull toward tomorrow. Plans appeared. Concerns surfaced. Instead of following them, he felt the bed supporting his body. He stayed over his feet even as he lay down. The body softened, the breath slowed, thoughts continued in the background. But he did not need to go with them. He realized that staying present was not about holding attention tightly. It was about allowing life to meet him where he was. The traveler understood now that much of his suffering had come from leaving himself too quickly, from not trusting the ground beneath him. Staying over his feet became an act of kindness, a way of saying, "This moment is enough." As the journey continued, this practice grew quieter and more natural. Less something he did, more something he remembered. And though the future still arrived step by step, he met it from a place of balance. Not rushing, not bracing, just standing where he was fully and letting the next step come when it was time. As the old way of looking gently falls away, a new relationship with oneself begins to take shape. As the traveler became steadier in staying over his feet, he began to notice something else about the mind. Thoughts did not always arrive loudly. They did not always announce themselves with urgency or emotion. Often they appeared quietly, so quietly that by the time he noticed them, he was already far away. This surprised him. He had imagined the thoughts were obvious events, something he would clearly see coming. But many of them slipped in unnoticed, like mist moving into a valley at night. One moment he was present, the next he was lost in a story without remembering how he got there. This led the traveler to observe more carefully. One afternoon he sat alone in a quiet place and simply watched his mind. He did not try to stop thinking. He did not try to follow thoughts. He watched. At first, everything felt calm. There were gaps between thoughts, moments of simple awareness. Then, without warning, a thought appeared. Not loudly, not urgently, just a simple idea. And suddenly several more followed. Before he realized it, he was inside a long chain of thinking, planning, remembering, imagining. When he finally noticed, he felt a familiar feeling. I've been gone. The traveler saw how this happened again and again. Thoughts rarely arrived alone. They invited others. One thought led to another. That one led to several more. And soon, a whole world of thinking had formed. The teachers of old had a name for this. They called it the spreading of the mind. The traveler understood why. Thinking spread quickly, quietly, almost invisibly. A single thought could grow into a long inner conversation before awareness returned. At first, this discovery discouraged him. He felt as though he was missing most of his own life, losing long stretches of time inside thought. But then he remembered something important. The moment of noticing was never absent. Even when he was lost, awareness returned, and that return was enough. He began to observe when he noticed thoughts, not judging himself, just being curious. Sometimes he noticed right at the beginning. A thought would arise and he would see it immediately. Other times he noticed in the middle of a long train of thought, and sometimes he noticed only after the thought had passed. All three happened naturally. The traveler realized that noticing earlier was not something he could force. It happened gradually through familiarity, like learning to hear a quiet sound in the distance. At first, you only notice it when it becomes loud. Later, you hear it sooner. He saw that the mind did not need to be monitored constantly. That kind of effort only created tension. Instead, he practiced relaxed awareness. When a thought was noticed, he acknowledged it. When it was not, he let that be too. There was no benefit in scolding himself for not noticing sooner. Harshness only strengthened the habit. The traveler began to understand. The thoughts were not the problem. The speed of their arrival was not the problem. The only difficulty came from being unconscious of them. Awareness brought light, and light softened everything it touched. One evening, as he rested, a familiar worry appeared. Before it could grow, he noticed it. This is a thought. The words were not spoken with effort. They were simply recognized. The worry stayed briefly. Then it faded. The traveler felt a quiet relief. Not because the thought disappeared, but because he did not follow it. He saw that thoughts lost their power when they were seen early. But even when they were seen late, awareness still brought freedom. This understanding made him gentler with himself. He no longer expected to catch every thought. He trusted the process. Each moment of noticing was a step toward clarity. Each return strengthened awareness. As he continued his journey, the traveler accepted that the mind would continue to spread, that thoughts would continue to arise quietly. But he also knew something else now. Awareness would always return. And each time it did, it brought him back to himself. As the traveler grew more familiar with the quiet way thoughts spread, he stopped being surprised by it. Instead of seeing it as a failure, he began to recognize it as the natural behavior of the mind. Thoughts were quick, they were subtle, and most of the time they did not ask for permission. One morning, the traveler woke with a sense of heaviness. Nothing was obviously wrong. The day had not yet begun, and yet the body felt tense and the mind felt crowded. He lay still and watched. A single thought appeared small and almost harmless. It carried a mild concern. Before he noticed, it had already invited others. What if today is difficult? What if something goes wrong? What if I do not have enough energy? The thoughts felt reasonable. They did not shout. They spoke quietly, as if offering helpful advice. Only after some time did the traveler realize he had been listening. When awareness returned, he did not push the thoughts away. He did not try to argue with them. He simply noticed. And in that noticing, something shifted. The thoughts were still present, but they no longer felt urgent. The traveler began to understand that many thoughts gained their power, not from their content, but from their timing. They arrived when awareness was relaxed. They slipped in unnoticed. Once inside, they built momentum. This was not a personal flaw. It was simply how the mind worked. The teachers had compared this to sparks landing in dry grass. A single spark meant nothing, but if it was not seen, it could start a fire. Awareness was like moisture. When it was present, thoughts could land without spreading. The traveler did not try to prevent sparks. He learned to notice them sooner. This noticing did not require effort. It required familiarity. He saw that when he was rested, thoughts were easier to notice. When he was tired, they spread more quickly. When emotions were strong, thoughts multiplied faster. All of this was natural. Instead of fighting these conditions, the traveler learned to work with them. On days when the mind felt slippery, he relied more on the body. He paid attention to physical sensations, the feeling of the ground, the movement of breath. These sensations were slower. They did not spread the way thoughts did. They gave him a place to stand. He also noticed that thoughts often pretended to be important. They carried a sense of urgency. They insisted on attention. But when he looked closely, many of them were repetitions, old patterns repeating themselves in slightly different forms. Seeing this changed his relationship to them. He no longer assumed that every thought required action. He treated them as passing events. Some days this was easy, other days it was not. There were moments when thoughts pulled him away, again and again. Moments when he noticed only after long periods of distraction. When this happened, he reminded himself of something simple. Noticing late was still noticing. There was no advantage in judging the delay. The moment awareness returned, the practice resumed. One evening, the traveler sat quietly as the light faded. A memory appeared, bringing a familiar emotion with it. In the past, this memory would have led to long reflection. This time he noticed it sooner. This is remembering. The memory did not disappear immediately, but it did not grow. It stayed for a moment, then passed. The traveler felt a sense of gratitude, not toward the thought, but toward the awareness that saw it. He realized that awareness was always neutral. It did not favor one thought over another. It did not argue or resist. It simply illuminated. This illumination was enough. The traveler stopped trying to manage the mind perfectly. He accepted that thoughts would continue to spread. He accepted that some days would feel clearer than others. What mattered was not control, but relationship. A relationship based on patience, on understanding, on trust. Trust that awareness would return. Trust that no thought could permanently take him away. As the journey continued, the traveler felt less concerned about what appeared in the mind. Thoughts could come, thoughts could go. He no longer measured his practice by how quiet the mind was. He measured it by how gently he returned. And with each return, something deepened. Not silence, not perfection, but a steady sense of being present even in the midst of movement. The traveler understood now that the mind's slippery nature was not an obstacle. It was part of the path. Each unnoticed thought was another opportunity to wake up. Each return was another reminder of where he was. And so he walked on, knowing that he would forget again. Knowing that he would return again. And in that rhythm of losing and finding awareness, continued to grow quietly, naturally, without force. And from that relationship, an important distinction quietly appears between truly being here and being lost in the mind. As the traveler continued to observe the slippery nature of thought, another understanding slowly emerged. It was not only that the mind wandered, it was where it wandered to. He began to notice two very different ways of living. Sometimes he was present for his life. Other times he was completely absent from it. The difference was subtle, yet profound. One afternoon, the traveler walked through a small marketplace. People passed by. Voices rose and fell. The scent of food drifted through the air. At first he was aware of it all. He felt his body moving. He heard the sounds clearly. He saw faces, colors, and movement. Then, without noticing when it happened, he was gone. His body kept walking, but his mind had left. It replayed a conversation from the past. It imagined something that might happen later. It built stories that had nothing to do with the moment unfolding around him. When awareness returned, the traveler realized he had missed much of what had been happening. The marketplace had continued. Life had moved on. He had been absent. This absence did not mean he was unconscious or asleep. He was awake. He was functioning, but he was not present. The traveler began to see how often this happened. He could be eating without tasting, walking without feeling, listening without hearing. Life was happening, but he was elsewhere. At first, this realization felt unsettling. How much of life had he missed this way? But then he remembered something important. Absence was not a mistake. It was a condition to be noticed. The teachers had spoken of this clearly. They said there is a difference between being present and being absent even while awake. Presence meant being here for what is happening. Absence meant being lost in thought while life continues in the background. Neither state was permanent. People moved between them constantly. The traveler began to watch this movement in himself. One moment he was present, the next he was absent, then present again. The shift often happened without warning. A sound would trigger a memory. A sensation would spark a thought, and suddenly attention would be pulled away. He noticed that absence was not dramatic. It felt normal, comfortable even. Thinking had a familiar pull. Stories felt engaging. The mind liked to wander. But he also noticed something else. When he was absent, the body often felt tense, the breath shallow. There was a subtle sense of disconnection. When he was present, the body felt grounded. Breathing felt natural. There was a quiet sense of ease. Presence did not require effort. Absence did not require intention. They simply happened. The traveler saw that many of his struggles came from being absent during difficult moments. When emotions arose, the mind quickly escaped into thinking. When discomfort appeared, attention left the body. Absence was a form of avoidance. Presence, on the other hand, meant staying. Staying with sensation, staying with emotion, staying with what was actually happening. This did not mean liking it. It meant allowing it. One evening, the traveler sat quietly as the sky darkened. A feeling of sadness arose without a clear reason. In the past, he would have immediately escaped into thought. He would have analyzed the feeling or distracted himself. This time he noticed the urge to leave. He stayed. He felt the sadness in the body, a heaviness, a softness. The feeling did not overwhelm him. It moved gently like a wave. After a while, it faded on its own. The traveler realized something important. Presence did not make emotions stronger. Absence often did. When he stayed present, emotions could move through him naturally. When he escaped into thought, emotions lingered in the background. This discovery changed how he understood absence. Absence was not rest, it was disconnection. Presence was not effort, it was honesty. The traveler did not try to eliminate absence, he simply learned to recognize it. Oh, he would realize, I have been away. And with that recognition, he returned. No judgment, no frustration, just a quiet coming back. As he continued his journey, the traveler accepted that absence would happen again and again. The mind would wander, attention would drift. But he also trusted that presence was always one noticing away. Life did not require constant awareness. It only required returning. And with each return, the traveler felt more at home in his own experience, more connected to the simple reality of being alive, right here as it was. As the traveler became more familiar with the movement between presence and absence, he stopped trying to choose one over the other. He saw clearly now that both were part of being human. Absence happened naturally. Presence returned naturally. What mattered was not preventing absence, but recognizing it. One morning, the traveler woke and immediately felt pulled away. Thoughts about the day arrived before he even sat up. Responsibilities, conversations, unfinished tasks crowded the mind. His body moved, but his attention stayed inside those thoughts. For a while, he did not notice this at all. Then, in a simple moment, awareness returned. He felt the weight of the blanket. He felt his breathing. He realized he had been absent. There was no disappointment in this realization, only clarity. I am here now. The traveler saw that absence often arrived quietly, without any clear beginning. It did not announce itself. It slipped in gently, wearing the disguise of usefulness. Thinking about the future felt responsible. Replaying the past felt meaningful. The mind convinced him that it was doing something important. But while the mind was busy, life continued without him. He began to notice this during conversations. Someone would speak, and at first he listened. Then a thought would appear about what to say next. Without realizing it, his attention left the other person. He was present in body, absent in mind. When he noticed this, he felt a small sadness, not guilt, just recognition. He gently returned to listening. The traveler understood now that presence was an act of respect. Respect for the moment, respect for others, respect for himself. Absence, on the other hand, was not wrong. It was simply unconsciousness. The teachers had never demanded constant presence. They had only encouraged waking up when possible. The traveler practiced this, waking up throughout the day. While washing his hands, he noticed the water. While waiting, he noticed impatience. While resting, he noticed the urge to distract himself. Sometimes he stayed present for several moments. Sometimes he was gone again almost immediately. Both happened without effort. He also noticed that absence increased when emotions were uncomfortable. When boredom arose, the mind escaped. When sadness appeared, thinking rushed in. When fear stirred attention, fled into planning. Absence was often a form of protection. Seeing this softened his attitude toward himself. He no longer blamed himself for leaving. He understood why it happened. And when he noticed absence, he returned with care. One evening, the traveler sat quietly as the sun disappeared below the horizon. A sense of loneliness arose. Immediately, the mind offered stories, memories, imagined futures. For a moment, he followed them. Then awareness returned. He felt the loneliness directly, a gentle ache in the chest, a quiet vulnerability. He stayed. The feeling did not overwhelm him. It moved slowly, then softened. The traveler realized that presence allowed emotions to complete themselves. Absence interrupted them. When he stayed present, emotions passed naturally. When he escaped, they lingered unresolved. This understanding deepened his trust in presence. He no longer rushed to leave difficult moments. He allowed them to be felt. This did not mean he enjoyed discomfort. It meant he stopped abandoning himself. Over time, presence began to feel safer than absence. Not because it was pleasant, but because it was honest. The traveler saw that presence connected him to life. Absence separated him from it. And yet he did not try to eliminate absence. He knew he would forget again. He knew he would wander again. This no longer concerned him. The path was not about staying present forever. It was about returning without judgment. Each return strengthened something quiet inside him. A sense of belonging, a sense of being at home in experience. As night came, the traveler lay down to sleep. Thoughts appeared as they always did. Sometimes he followed them, sometimes he noticed. When he noticed, he returned to the body, to the bed, to the breath. He stayed present just long enough. Sleep arrived naturally. The traveler understood now that presence was not a permanent state. It was a relationship built on noticing absence and gently coming back, again and again. And in that rhythm of leaving and returning, life no longer passed him by unnoticed. He was here often enough. And that was enough. As the traveler grew more comfortable with returning from absence to presence, he began to notice another pattern. Not all thoughts affected him in the same way. Some thoughts left him feeling lighter. Others left a subtle heaviness behind. At first, this difference was easy to miss. Thoughts came and went so quickly that he rarely paused to feel their effects. But as awareness became steadier, these differences became clearer. One morning, the traveler walked through open land just after sunrise. The air was cool. The ground felt firm beneath his feet. A thought arose about gratitude, about the simple fact that he could walk, breathe, and see the light of a new day. The thought passed quickly, but something remained. The body felt relaxed. The breath felt open. There was a quiet sense of ease. Later that same day, another thought appeared. It replayed a moment of irritation from the past, a small conflict, a sharp word. This thought also passed, but what it left behind felt very different. The body tightened slightly. The breath shortened. The chest felt heavy. The traveler stopped walking and stood still. He realized that thoughts were not neutral visitors. They shaped the inner landscape even after they were gone. The teachers had spoken of this long ago. They explained that the mind is like a field. Whatever is planted there will grow. Some seeds lead to peace. Others lead to suffering. The traveler began to observe this more carefully. When a thought of kindness appeared, the body softened. When a thought of generosity arose, there was warmth. When understanding replaced judgment, tension eased. But when thoughts of anger appeared, the body tightened. When resentment surfaced, the breath grew shallow. When fear took hold, restlessness followed. These reactions happened without effort. They were immediate and physical. The traveler saw now that thoughts were not just ideas, they were forces. For a long time he had believed that all thoughts deserved equal attention, that they were all simply mental events to be observed. Now he saw something more subtle. All thoughts could be noticed, but not all thoughts needed to be fed. The teachers used a simple image to explain this. They spoke of a cow herder guiding animals across open land. If the herder was careless, the cows would wander into dangerous areas. If the herder was attentive, the cows would stay on safe ground. The cows were like thoughts. The herder was like awareness. The traveler understood that awareness alone was not always enough. There also needed to be discernment. This did not mean judging thoughts as good or bad. It meant noticing where they led. One afternoon, the traveler sat quietly and watched his mind. A thought of comparison arose. He noticed it. Then he watched its effect. The body tightened. A subtle dissatisfaction appeared. He did not push the thought away. He simply did not follow it. Instead, he returned to the sensation of sitting, to the feeling of breathing. The comparison faded. Soon after, another thought appeared. It was simple and kind, a wish for well-being. This thought also faded, but the sense of ease remained. The traveler saw clearly now. Some thoughts led toward calm, others led toward agitation. Neither type needed to be suppressed, but one type needed far less attention. This understanding brought a new level of care to his practice. He stopped treating every thought as equally important. He became more interested in their consequences. When a thought led toward tension, he recognized it. When a thought led toward ease, he allowed it to unfold. This was not control, it was guidance. The traveler realized that freedom did not mean letting the mind run anywhere it wished. It meant knowing when to follow and when to let go. Awareness was the foundation. Discernment was the direction. As he continued walking, he felt a quiet confidence growing. Not confidence in having a perfect mind, but confidence in knowing how to care for it. He understood now that peace was not accidental. It was cultivated. And just as a field reflects what is planted within it, the mind reflected what it was repeatedly given. The traveler knew that this discovery would change how he walked forward. He was no longer just noticing thoughts. He was learning how to guide them, gently, wisely, and with care. As the traveler continued to observe how different thoughts affected him, his understanding deepened. He saw that the mind was not just a stream of passing events. It was also a place where habits were quietly formed. Each time a certain kind of thought appeared and was followed, it became easier for that thought to return. Each time it was noticed and gently released, its influence weakened. This was not something the traveler had to believe. He could feel it. One afternoon, while resting in the shade, a familiar pattern appeared. A thought of self-criticism arose. It spoke in a confident voice, listing small mistakes and imagined shortcomings. In the past, this voice had felt convincing. It had pulled him into long inner conversations. But now, he noticed something different. He noticed the effect almost immediately. The body tightened, the breath became shallow, the mind felt narrow. He did not argue with the thought. He did not try to replace it with a positive one. He simply recognized where it was leading. This leads to tension, he saw clearly. With that recognition, he did not feed it. He returned to the feeling of sitting, to the weight of the body, to the rhythm of breathing. The thought lingered briefly, then faded. The traveler felt a quiet relief. Not relief from winning a battle, but relief from not entering one. Later that day, another thought appeared. It was simple and gentle, a sense of appreciation for the shade, the air, the moment of rest. This thought also passed, but its effect stayed. The body felt open, the breath deepened, the mind felt spacious. The traveler understood now that the teacher's guidance was practical, not moral. They were not asking people to label thoughts as good or bad. They were asking them to notice consequences. Some thoughts led towards suffering, others led away from it. This was something anyone could observe for themselves. He began to see how this applied throughout the day. When irritation arose, he noticed its tight, contracting quality. When kindness appeared, he noticed the warmth it brought. When worry took hold, he felt the restlessness it created. Each time the body provided clear information. The traveler realized that the body was an honest teacher. It did not lie. It responded immediately. The mind, on the other hand, could justify almost anything. This is why awareness needed to include the body, not to analyze it, but to listen. The traveler also noticed that certain thoughts pretended to be urgent. They demanded attention. They insisted that something must be solved immediately. But when he paused and felt their effect, many of these thoughts led only to agitation. Seeing this, he became less impressed by urgency. He learned to wait. Waiting did not mean ignoring responsibilities. It meant not letting every thought dictate his inner state. Some actions could wait until clarity returned. Some problems solved themselves when not fed. This was a new kind of strength. One evening, as the traveler walked at dusk, a thought of anger appeared. Someone he had met earlier had spoken harshly. The mind replayed the moment, adding details, sharpening the story. Before, this would have carried him far. Now he noticed the familiar signs. The jaw tightened, the shoulders lifted, the breath shortened. He stopped walking. He felt the ground beneath his feet. He felt the body standing. He did not suppress the anger. He simply did not continue the story. The anger remained for a moment, then softened. The traveler saw clearly now. Following certain thoughts was optional. They could appear, they could be felt, but they did not have to be continued. This realization brought a sense of freedom that felt quiet and steady. He was no longer at the mercy of every thought that crossed his mind. He did not need to fight them. He only needed to see where they led. Over time, this discernment became more natural. Thoughts that led toward tension were noticed sooner. Thoughts that led toward ease were allowed to unfold gently. The mind began to change, not through force but through understanding. Just as a cow herder gently guided the animals away from danger, the traveler guided his attention toward what brought balance. This guidance was not rigid. Some days old patterns returned strongly. Some days discernment felt clear. Both were part of learning. When the traveler made mistakes, he did not judge himself. He simply noticed the result and learned from it. This learning was embodied, not intellectual. As night came, the traveler lay down to rest. Thoughts appeared as they always did. Some were light, some carried tension. He noticed their effects. He felt their movement in the body. Without effort, he allowed some to pass without engagement. Others faded on their own. He did not need to control the mind to sleep. He only needed to stop feeding what disturbed him. Sleep arrived gently. The traveler understood now that freedom of mind was not about stopping thought. It was about understanding it. By seeing clearly which thoughts led toward suffering and which led away, he learned to care for the mind as one would care for a living field. What he fed grew stronger. What he did not feed slowly lost its hold. This understanding did not make him perfect, but it made him kind, attentive, and wise. And with each step forward, he walked with greater ease, knowing that peace was something cultivated moment by moment through gentle awareness and careful guidance. As presence becomes more familiar, it becomes clear that not every thought carries us in the same direction. As the traveler learned to notice which thoughts led toward ease and which led toward tension, another lesson quietly revealed itself. Some thoughts were not only uncomfortable, they were deceptively attractive. They offered something sweet at first, even while carrying harm beneath the surface. One afternoon, the traveler sat resting near a narrow path. The day had been long. His body felt tired and his patience felt thin. A thought appeared about someone who had spoken carelessly earlier. At first, the thought felt justified. It explained why the traveler felt irritated. It offered a story that made sense. The thought tasted sweet. As he followed it, the mind sharpened the memory. Words replayed themselves. The traveler imagined what he should have said, what he might say next time. There was a brief feeling of satisfaction in this, a sense of being right, but as the story continued, something else became clear. The body tightened, the chest felt heavy, the breath grew shallow. The sweetness faded, leaving bitterness behind. The traveler paused. He remembered a teaching he had once heard long before his journey began. It spoke of poison hidden in honey. The teaching explained that some mental states offer immediate pleasure, but lead to suffering later. Others may feel difficult at first, but lead to peace. The traveler saw this clearly now. The thought of resentment had felt sweet in the beginning. It had offered validation, but it carried poison in its root. He did not need to suppress the thought to see this. He only needed to notice its full effect. He let the story stop, not by force, but by no longer feeding it. The irritation did not vanish immediately. It lingered in the body, but without the story, it had nowhere to grow. Slowly, it softened. The traveler realized that many unwholesome thoughts worked this way. They promised relief. They offered a sense of control or righteousness. They made suffering feel meaningful, but they always demanded payment later. Anger promised strength, but left exhaustion. Blame promised clarity, but left division. Self-criticism promised improvement, but left heaviness. The teachers had never asked people to avoid these thoughts because they were bad. They asked people to look more deeply, to see not just the first taste, but the after effect. The traveler began to practice this. When a thought arose, he did not ask whether it was pleasant. He asked where it led. Did it tighten the body or soften it? Did it narrow attention or open it? Did it create separation or connection? These questions were not intellectual. They were felt. One evening, as the traveler prepared to sleep, a familiar pattern appeared. A list of past mistakes surfaced. The mind began to replay moments of regret. At first, the thought felt useful. It promised learning. It promised improvement. But as the list grew longer, the body felt heavy. The breath slowed awkwardly. Restlessness appeared. The traveler saw the pattern. This was honey with poison beneath. He did not argue with the thoughts. He did not replace them with positive affirmations. He simply stopped feeding them. He returned to the feeling of lying down, to the support of the ground, to the rhythm of breathing. The thoughts faded gradually. The traveler felt a quiet gratitude for this understanding. He realized that freedom did not mean eliminating unwholesome thoughts forever. It meant recognizing them sooner. The earlier he noticed their true nature, the less power they had. Some thoughts still tempted him. Some still felt convincing, but he no longer trusted the first taste alone. He waited. He felt. He observed the result. This patience protected him from much unnecessary suffering. The traveler saw now that wisdom was not about choosing pleasure over discomfort. It was about choosing what led to peace over what led to harm. And this choice was available in every moment. As the day ended, he felt a growing sense of steadiness, not because the mind was pure or perfect, but because he was learning to see clearly. He understood that many struggles were not caused by external events, but by which thoughts he chose to nourish. With this insight, he walked forward more carefully, knowing that not everything sweet was beneficial, and not everything difficult was harmful. Some paths looked inviting at first and led to suffering. Others required patience and led to ease. And with awareness as his guide, the traveler was learning how to tell the difference. As the traveler continued to reflect on the sweetness and poison hidden within certain thoughts, he became more attentive to the moment when temptation first appeared. He saw that unwholesome thoughts rarely announced themselves honestly. They arrived dressed as something reasonable, even helpful. They spoke softly. They sounded familiar. They felt justified. One afternoon, as the traveler walked beneath a cloudy sky, fatigue settled into his body. With fatigue came vulnerability. A thought appeared, suggesting that he deserved to indulge in resentment. After all, he had been patient for so long. After all, others had been careless. The thought felt comforting at first. It wrapped itself around his weariness and offered relief. But the traveler paused. He had learned to wait. Instead of following the thought, he felt its effect. The jaw tightened, the shoulders lifted, the chest grew heavy. The sweetness was already fading. He understood now that many harmful thoughts depended on speed. They needed to be followed quickly before their cost became visible. Slowing down exposed them. The traveler saw that patience itself was a form of protection. When he did not rush to believe a thought, its true nature revealed itself. Some thoughts dissolved quickly when not fed. Others lingered but lost their authority. He also noticed that unwholesome thoughts often returned in familiar forms. The same stories, the same justifications. And this repetition was not personal, it was habitual. The teachers had explained that habits survive on attention. Without attention, they weaken. The traveler began to trust this. He did not fight his habits. He did not argue with them. He simply stopped nourishing them. One evening, as he sat quietly, a thought of blame appeared. Someone had made a mistake earlier in the day. The mind replayed the event, sharpening the edges. The traveler felt the familiar pull. Instead of resisting, he waited. He noticed the body, the tightness, the contraction. He saw clearly where the thought was leading. He chose not to follow. The thought hovered briefly, then passed. What remained was a sense of clarity. The traveler felt the difference between suppression and understanding. Suppression created tension. Understanding created release. By seeing the full arc of a thought from its sweet beginning to its bitter end, he no longer needed to push it away. He simply lost interest. This loss of interest was not indifference. It was wisdom. The traveler also noticed that some wholesome thoughts did not feel immediately pleasant. Thoughts of patience, thoughts of restraint, thoughts of letting go. At first, these felt uncomfortable. They asked him to release familiar patterns. They required trust. But when he followed them, the body softened. The breath deepened. The mind felt spacious. The contrast became unmistakable. The teachers had said that wisdom often felt quiet. It did not demand attention. It did not insist. It waited to be chosen. The traveler learned to recognize this quiet quality. When a thought shouted, he became cautious. When a thought whispered gently, he listened more closely. This did not make him rigid or judgmental. It made him discerning. He saw now that freedom was not about denying pleasure. It was about seeing beyond the first taste. Some pleasures carried long shadows. Some difficulties carried hidden ease. Knowing this changed how he moved through his days. When irritation arose, he paused. When self-criticism appeared, he waited. When resentment tempted him, he looked deeper. He did not always succeed. There were days when he followed old patterns despite knowing better. Days when the sweetness distracted him before awareness returned. When this happened, he did not punish himself. He observed the result. The result always taught him. Suffering was a clear teacher. So was peace. Over time, the traveler began to trust experience more than thought. He trusted what the body revealed. He trusted the after effect. This trust grew slowly. One night as he prepared to sleep, a familiar thought pattern appeared. a desire to replay the day, searching for errors. The thought felt responsible. It felt necessary. The traveler paused. He waited. He felt the body grow heavy. He felt restlessness emerge. He recognized the poison beneath the honey. Gently, he let the thought go. He returned to the breath, to the support beneath him. Sleep arrived without struggle. The traveler understood now that wisdom was not something added to the mind. It was something uncovered. By seeing clearly again and again what led to suffering and what led to ease, he was learning to choose wisely. Not perfectly, but sincerely. Each moment offered the same choice. Each thought offered a direction. And with patience as his ally, the traveler continued forward, knowing that clarity grows not from force but from careful, honest seeing. When that sweetness dissolves the nature of thought, itself comes into view, not an enemy but not something to cling to either. As the traveler became more skilled at recognizing which thoughts led toward ease and which led toward suffering, a quieter question began to form. If thoughts could be observed, guided and released, then what exactly were they made of? They felt real, they felt solid, and yet they vanished so easily when not fed. One evening, the traveler stopped near a wide-open field after a light rain. The sky was clearing and the air felt fresh and cool. As he looked up, he noticed something forming slowly above him. A rainbow. It appeared gently without effort. Colors arched across the sky, vivid yet soft. The traveler stood still watching. The rainbow felt undeniable. It was clearly there. And yet he knew something about it. He could not touch it. He could not hold it. No matter how real it looked, it had no substance. As he watched, the rainbow began to fade. The colors softened. The arc dissolved into the open sky. Nothing had broken. Nothing had been lost. The traveler felt a quiet recognition. Thoughts were like this. They appeared clearly. They felt convincing. They displayed vivid colors of emotion, memory, and imagination. And yet, when examined closely, they had no solid core. The teachers had used this image carefully. They did not say thoughts were unreal. They said thoughts were empty of substance. Empty did not mean meaningless. It meant not solid, not permanent, not something that could be held. The traveler began to reflect on his own experience. A thought would appear. It would seem important, urgent, personal. Then, if left alone, it would fade. Where did it go? It did not travel anywhere. It simply dissolved, just like the rainbow. The traveler noticed that suffering arose when he tried to grasp the rainbow, when he believed the thought was solid, when he treated it as something that defined him. I am this thought. This thought is true. This thought must be acted on. These assumptions gave thoughts weight. But when he saw thoughts as rainbow-like, something shifted. He did not need to deny them. He did not need to chase them away. He only needed to see their nature. One afternoon, the traveler sat quietly and allowed a familiar worry to appear. It spoke of uncertainty, of what might happen next. Instead of following it, he looked at it closely. The thought was there. It felt real. But when he searched for its substance, there was nothing to hold. It was an image, a sentence, a feeling passing through. When he did not grasp it, it faded. The traveler felt a deep relief. He realized that thoughts did not trap him by force. They trapped him by belief. Belief in their solidity. Belief in their permanence, belief that they were who he was. Seeing thoughts as rainbows did not make life cold or distant. It made it lighter. He could appreciate a thought the way he appreciated a rainbow, without trying to possess it. Pleasant thoughts could be enjoyed. Unpleasant thoughts could be allowed. Neither needed to be clung to. The traveler also saw how this understanding softened his relationship with himself. Harsh self-judgments lost their authority. They were seen as passing colors, not truths carved in stone. When a thought said, "You are not enough," he saw it as a pattern of light, not a verdict. It appeared. It passed. The body relaxed. The traveler understood now why the teachers emphasized seeing clearly rather than changing content. Changing content meant fighting rainbows. Seeing clearly meant letting them be. This did not mean he stopped caring about his actions. It meant he stopped mistaking thoughts for reality. As evening approached, the traveler watched clouds drift across the sky. Colors shifted again as the sun lowered. Nothing needed to be held. Nothing needed to last. Thoughts would appear. Thoughts would disappear. Life would continue unfolding. And for the first time, the traveler felt a sense of freedom that did not depend on controlling the mind. It depended on understanding its nature. Thoughts were vivid, thoughts were influential, but they were not solid. Like rainbows in an open sky, they appeared beautifully temporarily and left no trace behind. Seeing this clearly, the traveler rested more easily in his own experience, knowing that whatever appeared in the mind could be met with curiosity rather than fear. As the traveler continued to reflect on the nature of thoughts, the image of the rainbow stayed with him. It returned again and again, not as an idea, but as a felt understanding. Thoughts appeared. They displayed color and shape. They seemed vivid and convincing. And yet, when not grasped, they dissolved quietly. This understanding changed how the traveler met difficult moments. One afternoon, while resting beneath a tree, a familiar pattern arose. A thought about failure appeared. It carried a heavy tone, suggesting that the journey had not been meaningful enough, that something important was still missing. In the past, this thought would have tightened his chest. It would have led to long inner debates and quiet discouragement. This time he paused. He looked at the thought directly. It was there, clear, persuasive. But when he searched for its substance, there was nothing solid to find. It was a sentence forming in the mind, a memory blended with imagination, a feeling passing through the body. Like a rainbow, it depended on certain conditions to appear. And like a rainbow, it would fade when those conditions changed. The traveler did not push the thought away. He did not argue with it. He simply did not hold it. Slowly, the thought softened. Then it disappeared. The traveler noticed something important. When he did not cling to the thought, the emotion attached to it lost strength. The body relaxed. The breath deepened. This taught him that emotions often borrowed their intensity from thoughts. When thoughts were seen clearly, emotions could move more freely. He began to experiment with this understanding. When anxiety arose, he looked for the thought beneath it. When sadness appeared, he noticed the story supporting it. When frustration surfaced, he watched the mental images forming around it. Again and again, he found the same thing. Thoughts created the frame. Emotions filled it. When the frame dissolved, the emotion had space to complete itself. The traveler realized that seeing thoughts as rainbow-like did not remove responsibility from his life. It removed unnecessary suffering. He still planned, he still remembered, he still reflected, but he no longer mistook these mental movements for solid truths. A plan was a plan. A memory was a memory. A judgment was a passing construction. None of them defined him. This understanding brought a new softness to his practice. When a thought said, "You should be different," he saw it as a color passing through the sky of the mind. When another said, "This moment is not enough," he saw it shimmer briefly, then fade. He did not need to believe or disbelieve these thoughts. He only needed to see them. The traveler noticed that this way of seeing required gentleness. If he looked at thoughts too aggressively, they seemed to harden. If he looked with curiosity, they softened naturally. This curiosity was not analytical. It was simple awareness. What is this made of? Does this last? These questions were felt, not spoken. One evening, as the traveler watched the sky at dusk, another rainbow appeared faintly in the distance. It was less vivid than before, almost transparent. Still, it was beautiful. The traveler smiled. He realized that thoughts did not need to be dramatic to be seen clearly. Even faint ones could be noticed. Even subtle stories could be recognized. This recognition brought freedom. He no longer feared certain thoughts. Fear depended on believing that thoughts had power on their own. Seeing their empty nature removed that fear. This did not mean the traveler became passive or indifferent. It meant he became discerning without tension. He acted when action was needed. He rested when rest was appropriate. Thoughts informed him, but they did not control him. As night came, the traveler lay down to sleep. Thoughts drifted through the mind as they always did. Images, fragments of conversation, ideas about tomorrow. He watched them appear and disappear. None needed to be finished. None needed to be resolved. They were like colors moving across an open sky. Sleep arrived naturally. The traveler understood now why the teachers had emphasized seeing over changing. Changing required effort. Seeing required honesty. When thoughts were seen clearly, they changed on their own. This understanding did not come all at once. It deepened slowly through repetition and experience. Some days thoughts still felt solid. Some days he forgot the rainbow. When this happened, he did not judge himself. He waited. Sooner or later, awareness returned. And when it did, the mind opened again. The traveler continued his journey with a lighter step. Not because life had become easier, but because he no longer carried the weight of believing every thought that passed through his mind. Thoughts could appear. Thoughts could vanish. Like rainbows, they came and went, leaving the sky unchanged. And in this open sky of awareness, the traveler found a quiet confidence. Whatever arose could be met. Whatever passed could be released. Nothing needed to be held forever. As the traveler's understanding of thoughts deepened, he began to notice how easily the mind forgot this rainbow-like nature. Even after seeing clearly again and again, thoughts could still appear solid. They could still pull him in. This forgetting no longer surprised him. He understood now that insight was not a permanent state. It was a recognition that needed to be renewed. One morning, the traveler woke, feeling unsettled. Nothing obvious was wrong. The body was rested. The day was quiet, and yet the mind felt heavy. A thought appeared saying that something was missing, that the journey should feel more complete by now. that peace should be more stable. The thought felt convincing. For a moment, the traveler followed it. He compared his present experience to an imagined ideal. The body tightened. A familiar dissatisfaction arose. Then awareness returned. He remembered the rainbow. He looked at the thought carefully. It was a picture of the future, a comparison, a story about how things should be. It had color and shape. It felt real. But when he searched for its substance, there was nothing to grasp. The dissatisfaction softened. The traveler saw that even subtle thoughts could create suffering when believed. Not dramatic ones, not loud ones. Quiet expectations were often the most convincing. This understanding brought humility. He realized that seeing the nature of thought once was not enough. It had to be seen again and again in many different forms. Thoughts about success, thoughts about failure, thoughts about spiritual progress. All of them were rainbows. Some were bright and obvious, others were pale and almost invisible. All dissolved when not held. The traveler began to trust this more deeply. When a thought arose, he no longer rushed to interpret it. He asked a simple question through direct experience. Does this last? He waited. Sometimes the thought disappeared quickly. Other times it lingered. But eventually it always changed. Nothing stayed fixed. The traveler also noticed how believing thoughts created a sense of self. I am someone who should be further along. I am someone who struggles. I am someone who understands. Each of these identities was built from thought. When he looked closely, they had no solid foundation. They were stories assembled from memory and expectation. Seeing this felt freeing. He did not need to define himself through thought. He did not need to carry a fixed identity. He could simply be present. One afternoon, the traveler watched children playing near a stream. They laughed, argued briefly, then laughed again. Their emotions moved quickly. Nothing lingered for long. The traveler noticed that children did not hold on to thoughts the way adults did. They experienced, then moved on. This was not ignorance. It was immediacy. The traveler felt a gentle joy watching this. He realized that seeing thoughts as rainbows returned him to this immediacy. Not childishness, but freshness. Each moment was new. Each thought arose and passed without needing to define anything. This did not mean the traveler stopped learning from experience. It meant he stopped carrying unnecessary weight. When he made a mistake, he learned. He did not build a story about who he was. When something went well, he appreciated it. He did not cling. This balance felt natural. As evening approached, the traveler sat quietly and noticed thoughts drifting through the mind. Some were familiar, some were new. He did not categorize them. He did not evaluate them. He simply watched. A thought arose about the journey. It suggested that the understanding of rainbows was important. The traveler smiled. Even this was a thought. It appeared. It shimmered. It passed. Nothing needed to be added. The traveler understood now that insight was not something to possess. It was something to return to. Whenever suffering appeared, it was a sign that a thought had been taken as solid. Whenever ease appeared, it was a sign that the nature of thought was being seen. This made the path simple. Not easy, but simple. See clearly, release gently, return again. As night came, the traveler lay down to sleep. Thoughts appeared as they always did. Some tried to draw him into plans. Others replayed fragments of the day. He watched them like colors moving across the sky. He did not need to finish any of them. Sleep arrived softly. The traveler rested knowing that understanding would fade and return many times, knowing that forgetting was part of learning, and knowing that each time he remembered the rainbow-like nature of thought, he returned to a spaciousness that had always been there. Thoughts would come, thoughts would go. The sky remained open, and in that openness, the traveler found a freedom that did not depend on controlling the mind, only on seeing it clearly again and again. And as thoughts are seen for what they are, something more stable begins to be recognized, something that does not come and go. After learning to see thoughts as rainbows, the traveler began to notice something even more stable than thought itself. No matter what appeared in the mind, something was always there to see it. Thoughts came and went, images shifted, emotions rose and fell, yet awareness remained. This realization unfolded slowly through simple observation, rather than insight. The traveler did not arrive at it through reasoning. He arrived at it by watching his own experience again and again. One afternoon, the traveler lay on his back, resting on open ground. Above him, the sky stretched wide and clear. A few clouds drifted slowly across it. He watched them without effort. Some clouds were thin and light, others were darker and heavier. They moved at different speeds. They changed shape constantly, and yet the sky itself did not change. The clouds never disturbed it. They did not stain it. They did not leave marks behind. As the traveler watched, a quiet recognition formed. Thoughts were like these clouds. Awareness was like the sky. The teachers had used this image often, but the traveler now understood why. It was not meant to be poetic. It was meant to be practical. A thought of worry appeared. It moved across awareness like a dark cloud. It felt heavy for a moment, but when it passed, awareness remained untouched. A pleasant thought appeared next. It felt light, almost joyful. It too drifted through. Awareness stayed the same. The traveler saw clearly now that awareness did not argue with thoughts. It did not prefer one cloud over another. It simply allowed them to pass. This understanding changed how he related to difficult experiences. In the past, when sadness appeared, he believed it covered everything. He believed it defined the moment. Now he saw something different. Sadness was a cloud. Awareness was the sky. The sadness could be felt fully without becoming the whole of experience. One evening, the traveler sat quietly as a sense of fear arose. It came without warning, tight in the chest. Before this, fear would have consumed his attention. He would have become the fear. This time he noticed something subtle. The fear was being known. There was fear, and there was awareness of fear. They were not the same. The fear moved. It changed. It intensified briefly, then softened. Awareness did not move. This realization brought deep relief. The traveler did not need to remove emotions to be at peace. He did not need to escape them. He only needed to recognize that he was not identical to them. The teachers had called this non-identification. But the traveler felt it directly, without names. He was not the thought. He was not the emotion. He was the space in which they appeared. This did not make him distant or numb. It made him more intimate with experience. When joy arose, he felt it fully. When pain arose, he stayed with it honestly. But he was no longer lost inside either. The traveler also noticed how this understanding softened self-judgment. When a thought said, "I'm not doing this right," he saw it as another cloud. It passed. The sky remained. He no longer needed to defend himself against thoughts. There was nothing to defend. Awareness was already intact. One morning, as the traveler walked through open land, a strong emotion arose. A wave of grief, unexpected and deep. He stopped walking. He felt the grief in the body. Tightness, heaviness. At the same time, he noticed awareness holding the experience. The grief did not overwhelm him. It moved through like a storm moving across a wide sky. After some time it eased. The traveler realized something important. If he had believed he was the grief, he would have been lost inside it. By recognizing awareness, he could stay present without drowning. This understanding did not remove suffering entirely, but it removed the fear of suffering. He no longer needed to run from emotions. They could move freely. The traveler understood now why the teachers spoke of refuge in awareness. Not as an escape, but as a ground. No matter what appeared, awareness remained. Clouds could gather, storms could pass. The sky was never harmed. As evening came, the traveler lay down to rest. Thoughts drifted by. Emotions surfaced gently. He did not try to manage them. He rested as the sky. And for the first time he understood peace, not as a feeling, but as a recognition. A recognition that he had always been the space in which life unfolded. Thoughts would come, emotions would rise and fall, but awareness remained steady, open, and untouched. And in this recognition, the traveler found a deep sense of safety, one that did not depend on conditions, only on seeing clearly what had always been there. As the traveler spent more time resting his awareness, he began to notice how easily he forgot this understanding. Even after seeing clearly that he was not the clouds, the mind would still pull him back into them. This forgetting no longer felt like a failure. It felt natural. Awareness did not need to be held. It only needed to be remembered. One morning, the traveler woke with a heavy feeling in his chest. A vague sense of unease lingered. Thoughts quickly followed, trying to explain the feeling. Something is wrong. Something needs to change. This should not be happening. For a while he believed these thoughts. The heaviness seemed to spread. The body tightened. Then gently, awareness returned. He noticed the feeling itself, not the story about it, just the sensation. There was heaviness, and there was awareness of heaviness. The traveler saw again that awareness was not disturbed by what it knew. It simply knew. The heaviness shifted. It did not disappear instantly, but it softened. This taught him something important. Awareness did not make experiences pleasant. It made them workable. When he was lost inside thoughts and emotions, everything felt personal and overwhelming. When he rested, as awareness experiences could move. The traveler also noticed that awareness was not something he created. It was already present before any effort. Thoughts arose within it. Emotions appeared within it. Even the effort to be aware appeared within it. This realization removed pressure. He no longer tried to hold awareness perfectly. He allowed himself to forget. Forgetting simply meant clouds had covered the sky. The sky itself had not gone anywhere. One afternoon, the traveler sat quietly as frustration arose. Plans had not worked out. The mind wanted answers. At first, he felt contracted. Then he noticed awareness again. There was frustration, and there was knowing of frustration. He did not step away from the feeling. He stayed present with it. The frustration moved like weather. It surged, it weakened. Awareness remained open. The traveler saw now that emotions did not ask him to disappear into them. They asked to be felt. When he resisted emotions, they lingered. When he allowed them within awareness, they completed themselves. This understanding changed how he related to pain. Pain no longer meant danger, it meant experience. The traveler began to trust awareness as a container large enough to hold anything. Joy, fear, confusion, grief. None of these threatened awareness. He also noticed that awareness did not take sides. It did not prefer joy over sadness. It did not judge. This neutrality felt kind. For the first time, the traveler felt accepted by his own experience. Nothing needed to be excluded. Even the desire to escape was allowed. One evening, as he watched the sky darken, a deep stillness appeared. Not silence, not blankness, just a sense of openness. Thoughts passed through, but they felt distant, like clouds far away. The traveler realized that awareness did not require effort to stay open. Effort was only needed to leave it. This insight was quiet but profound. He understood now that the practice was not to hold awareness constantly. It was to notice when he was no longer resting in it. Each noticing was a return. Some returns were quick, some took time, all were welcome. As night came, the traveler lay down to sleep. Thoughts appeared as always, images, fragments, half-formed ideas. He did not need to follow them. He did not need to stop them. He rested as the space in which they appeared. The body softened. The breath slowed. Sleep arrived naturally. The traveler understood now that awareness was not a technique. It was his nature. Clouds would continue to appear. Storms would pass. But the sky was never damaged, and in remembering this again and again, he found a refuge that did not depend on conditions, only on the simple act of seeing what was already here. Yet with that stability, a deeply human question quietly arises, soft in its tone, but profound in its depth. As the traveler became more familiar with resting, as awareness, a subtle fear began to surface. If he was not his thoughts and not his emotions, then who was he? This question did not arrive loudly. It appeared quietly beneath the calm. At first, the traveler did not notice it at all. He only felt a slight unease, a sense of ground shifting. Awareness felt open and spacious, but part of him wanted something solid to stand on. One afternoon, the traveler sat near a still lake. The water was calm, reflecting the sky almost perfectly. Mountains and clouds appeared clearly on its surface. As he watched, a breeze passed over the lake. The surface rippled. The reflections distorted and broke apart. Nothing had happened to the mountains. Nothing had happened to the sky. Only the reflection had changed. The traveler felt a quiet understanding form. For most of his life, he had taken the reflections to be himself. Thoughts, emotions, roles, stories. They had felt solid because he had never questioned them. Now, as awareness became clearer, those reflections felt less reliable, and without them, something felt unfamiliar. The mind reacted. If I am not my thoughts, then what am I? If there is no solid self, what remains? The traveler noticed tension arise with these questions. The body tightened slightly. The breath shortened. He recognized this pattern. The mind was trying to replace one identity with another. It wanted a new story, a better definition. But awareness did not provide answers in words. It offered something else. Presence. The traveler stayed with the feeling of not knowing. He did not rush to resolve it. At first, the uncertainty felt uncomfortable. The mind wanted clarity, something to hold on to. But as he stayed, something softened. He realized that the fear was not of emptiness. It was of losing control. The idea of a solid self had once provided stability. Even when it caused suffering, it felt familiar. Letting go of it felt like stepping into open space. One evening, the traveler lay down to rest with this unease still present. Thoughts tried to explain it, to name it. He did not follow them. Instead, he noticed the simple fact of being aware. Awareness was present, clear, steady, even without a definition. He saw that awareness did not need a name. It did not need a story to function. It was already here, knowing experience directly. The traveler began to understand that the question, "Who am I?" was not meant to be answered conceptually. It was meant to be lived. Each moment of awareness was already an answer. Silent, immediate. He noticed that when he stopped trying to define himself, there was relief. The body relaxed. The breath deepened. Nothing was missing. The traveler also noticed that the fear came and went like any other emotion. It arose, it peaked, it faded. Awareness remained. This showed him something important. Even the fear of losing the self was just another cloud. It did not threaten the sky. The traveler stopped trying to resolve the question of identity. He allowed it to remain open. In that openness, life continued. He walked, he ate, he rested. No definition was required. He saw now that clinging to a fixed sense of self had been exhausting. Defending it, improving it, judging it. Without that burden, experience felt lighter. This did not mean he disappeared. It meant he became more available. Available to the moment, available to others, available to life as it unfolded. As night came, the traveler sat quietly and noticed thoughts about himself arise. Old labels, old identities. He watched them appear and pass. None needed to be accepted. None needed to be rejected. They were reflections on water. The water itself remained. The traveler understood now that freedom did not come from finding the right answer to who he was. It came from no longer needing one. Awareness was enough, and in resting as that awareness without adding a story, he found a quiet confidence that did not depend on certainty, only on presence. As the traveler continued living without a fixed answer to who he was, he noticed something unexpected. Life did not become confusing, it became simpler. Without constantly referring back to a story of self, moments unfolded more directly. Experience met awareness without delay. One morning, the traveler woke early and stepped outside as light began to spread across the land. Birds moved through the air. The ground felt cool beneath his feet. There was walking, there was seeing, there was breathing. No one needed to claim these actions. For a long time, the traveler had believed that a sense of self was required for life to function, that without it, everything would fall apart. Now he saw that this was not true. Life was happening on its own. Thoughts still appeared. They still used the word I. Plans were made. Memories surfaced. But these thoughts no longer felt like a center. They were tools, not identities. The traveler noticed this clearly one afternoon while helping someone lift a heavy object. The body adjusted, muscles engaged, attention focused. There was no time to think about who he was. Action happened naturally. Only afterward did a thought appear saying I helped. The action had not required a self-image. The story came later. This insight deepened his trust. He saw that the sense of self was not wrong. It was useful. But it did not need to be believed as absolute. It was a function, not a truth. The traveler also noticed that when the sense of self softened, relationships changed. When someone spoke to him, he listened more fully. There was less need to protect an image, less need to be right. Conversations felt lighter. He could disagree without tension. He could admit uncertainty without shame. Without a rigid self to defend, openness arose naturally. There were moments when the old sense of self returned strongly. Moments of pride, moments of embarrassment, moments of comparison. The traveler did not resist these. He recognized them. A self-image would form. It would stay briefly. It would fade. Awareness remained. He understood now that the self was not something to destroy. It was something to see clearly. Seen clearly, it lost its grip. One evening, the traveler sat quietly as a memory arose from long ago. A moment of regret. A feeling of I should have been different. In the past, this memory would have tightened his chest. It would have defined him. Now he saw it as a story replaying. The emotion arose. The thought labeled it. He stayed present. The regret softened. The traveler felt compassion, not toward a solid self, but toward a moment of human experience. This compassion felt natural, unforced. He saw that without clinging to identity, kindness arose more easily, not only toward others, but toward himself. There was no longer a constant inner judge measuring progress. There was only experience unfolding. As days passed, the traveler noticed a quiet joy appearing more often. Not excitement, not pleasure tied to outcomes, just ease. This ease did not come from understanding everything. It came from not needing to. Life no longer felt like a problem to solve. It felt like something to meet. The traveler realized that the fear of losing the self had been unfounded. Nothing essential had been lost. What had been lost was tension, defensiveness, endless self-concern. What remained was presence. One night, as the traveler lay down to sleep, thoughts about the journey appeared. Stories about growth, ideas about insight. He noticed them. Even these were reflections. He let them pass. The body rested. The breath slowed. Sleep arrived. The traveler understood now that the self was like a shadow. It appeared when there was light. It moved when he moved, but it did not need to be followed. Awareness was primary. The self was secondary. Knowing this did not require effort. It required honesty. Each moment, awareness was already here. No definition needed. And in this simplicity, the traveler found a freedom that was not dramatic or final, but steady, quiet, and deeply human. Life continued. The journey continued, not guided by a fixed identity, but by presence itself, meeting each moment as it arrived. And as the need for a fixed identity loosens, the way one moves through life begins to change. As the traveler lived more freely without clinging to a fixed sense of self, he began to notice a subtle shift in how effort appeared. For much of his life, effort had felt heavy. Something pushed, something strained. Now, effort felt different. It arose naturally when needed, and disappeared when it was not. One morning, the traveler found himself helping to repair a broken path after a storm. Stones had been displaced. The ground was uneven. He lifted rocks. He placed them carefully. He adjusted the surface so others could walk safely again. The work required strength and attention. The body tired. The hands grew sore. And yet there was no inner resistance. He was not thinking I should not be doing this. He was not measuring his progress. He was simply working. When the work was finished, he rested. No pride arose. No complaint. The action had completed itself. The traveler realized that much of his exhaustion in the past had not come from effort itself, but from the story around effort. The sense of, I am doing this, I must succeed, this should be different. Without these stories, action felt clean. The teachers had spoken of this as right effort. Not forcing, not collapsing, simply responding appropriately. The traveler saw how this applied to the inner life as well. When awareness was present, he noticed thoughts without strain. When emotions arose, he stayed with them without forcing them away. There was effort in noticing, but it was light, like holding a bird gently in the hands, firm enough not to drop it, soft enough not to harm it. He also noticed that when effort was guided by fear, it became rigid. When guided by clarity, it became flexible. One afternoon, the traveler felt irritation arise while walking through a crowded place. People moved unpredictably. Noise filled the air. In the past, he would have tightened. He would have blamed others. He would have carried the irritation long after leaving. This time, he noticed the irritation early. There was tension in the body, heat in the chest. He did not suppress it. He did not indulge it. He adjusted his pace. He softened his breathing. The irritation passed. Effort had appeared in the form of attention. It did not require struggle. The traveler began to trust this more and more. He saw that effort was not something he needed to maintain constantly. It appeared when needed, like a tool picked up and set down. When he tried to hold effort continuously, fatigue followed. When he allowed effort to come and go, energy returned. This understanding changed how he related to practice. He no longer tried to be aware all the time. He responded when awareness was needed. When he forgot, he forgot. When he noticed, he noticed. There was no urgency. One evening, as the traveler rested by a quiet stream, a familiar thought appeared. You should be further along by now. In the past, this thought would have sparked effort, trying harder, correcting. This time he saw it clearly. The body tightened slightly. He relaxed. Effort softened. The thought faded. The traveler realized that effort guided by self-judgment always led to contraction. Effort guided by care led to ease. Care felt different from control. Care listened. Control demanded. The traveler also noticed how effort changed in relationships. When he tried to be someone for others, effort felt heavy. When he simply responded honestly, effort felt natural. Listening required attention but not strain. Speaking required clarity but not defense. Effort flowed. The traveler understood now that right effort was not about pushing toward an ideal. It was about meeting conditions wisely. When the body was tired, rest was effort. When the mind was scattered, attention was effort. When confusion arose, patience was effort. All of these were forms of care. As night came, the traveler lay down to sleep. Thoughts drifted through the mind. He noticed them without trying to control them. Effort was not required. Sleep arrived. The traveler saw now that freedom was not the absence of effort, but the absence of unnecessary effort. Life still required action. It still required attention, but it no longer required constant striving. With this understanding, the traveler felt more at ease with the unfolding of his path. There was nothing to force, nothing to rush. Each moment carried its own instruction, and with gentle attention, effort arose where needed, then dissolved again, leaving the traveler rested, present, and ready for what came next. As the traveler continued to live with this lighter relationship to effort, he began to notice how deeply striving had once shaped his inner world. Even when nothing urgent was happening, part of him had always been pushing to improve, pushing to arrive, pushing to become something else. Now, without that constant pressure, space appeared. One morning, the traveler woke earlier than usual. The world was quiet. No plans demanded attention. He sat up slowly and noticed a familiar impulse arise. The urge to do something useful, to make the moment productive. He paused. Instead of following the urge, he felt it. There was a subtle tension in the chest, a leaning forward of the mind. He recognized it as old habit. The traveler did not reject the impulse. He simply did not obey it immediately. He stayed where he was, breathing, sitting, listening to the quiet. The impulse softened. What replaced it was not laziness, it was ease. The traveler realized that much of his striving had not come from necessity but from discomfort with stillness. Stillness had once felt unproductive, even unsafe. Now it felt natural. He saw that right effort included knowing when not to act. This was not avoidance, it was discernment. Later that day, the traveler encountered a difficult situation. A disagreement arose between two people nearby. Voices grew sharp. Tension filled the space. Immediately, an urge appeared to intervene, to fix, to smooth things over. The traveler noticed the urge. He paused. He felt into the situation, listened carefully, watched. After a moment, it became clear that stepping in would only add confusion. The people involved needed space to speak, so he stayed silent. This silence was not passive, it was attentive. Eventually, the tension eased on its own. The voices softened. The moment passed. The traveler understood something important. Right effort was not always visible. Sometimes it appeared as action. Sometimes it appeared as restraint. Both required awareness. In the past, he had equated effort with doing. Now he saw that effort also included not doing what was unnecessary. This insight changed how he related to his own mind. When a strong emotion arose, he no longer rushed to manage it. He stayed present. When a thought appeared demanding resolution, he waited. Often the emotion resolved itself. Often the thought lost urgency. Effort arose only when it was truly needed. The traveler also noticed how this approach conserved energy. Without constant striving, the body felt less tired. The mind felt clearer. He was no longer fighting himself. One afternoon, as the traveler walked slowly, he noticed how the body adjusted naturally to the terrain. When the ground sloped, the posture changed. When the path narrowed, the steps became careful. No instruction was required, no planning. The body knew how to respond. The traveler saw that awareness worked the same way. When present awareness responded appropriately, it did not need to be directed constantly. Interference only disrupted this natural intelligence. This realization brought trust. He trusted awareness to know when effort was required. He trusted rest to come when effort was not. This trust was not blind, it was experiential. Each time he forced effort, tension increased. Each time he allowed effort to arise naturally, things unfolded smoothly. There were still moments when he reverted to old habits, moments of pushing, moments of striving. When this happened, he noticed the contraction. That noticing was enough. Effort softened again. The traveler no longer tried to eliminate striving forever. He simply recognized it when it appeared. Recognition brought choice. Choice brought freedom. As evening approached, the traveler sat quietly and reflected on the day. Not evaluating, just noticing. Action had happened. Rest had happened. Neither felt heavy. The traveler realized that right effort was not something he possessed. It was something that emerged from clarity. When clarity was present, effort was appropriate. When clarity faded, effort became strained. This understanding removed the pressure to always be doing something right. He did not need to monitor himself constantly. Awareness would signal when adjustment was needed. As night came, the traveler lay down to sleep. Thoughts appeared briefly. Plans tried to form. He noticed them. No effort was required. The body relaxed. Breathing slowed. Sleep arrived easily. The traveler rested knowing that effort would return when needed and disappear when not. Life did not require constant management. It required presence. With this, the traveler felt a deep sense of balance. Not balance achieved through control, but balance that arose naturally when he stopped interfering. And as the journey continued, he carried this understanding quietly, meeting each moment with just enough effort and no more than necessary. When effort is no longer driven by tension, another familiar habit gently reveals itself, one that often goes unnoticed. As the traveler grew more comfortable with allowing effort to arise and dissolve naturally, another pattern revealed itself. Even when there was no obvious striving, there was still a subtle habit of seeking a better moment, seeking a deeper understanding, seeking a feeling that would finally confirm that everything was as it should be. This seeking was quiet. It did not feel anxious or desperate. In fact, it often felt reasonable. One afternoon, the traveler sat beneath a tree, resting. The air was mild. The body felt relaxed. And yet there was a subtle sense of waiting for something else to happen, waiting for the moment to become more complete. The traveler noticed this carefully. Nothing was wrong with the moment. The body was at ease. The mind was calm. And still, there was a feeling of almost. He saw now that seeking did not always come from dissatisfaction. Sometimes it came from habit. For many years, the traveler had lived with the assumption that fulfillment was always just ahead. One more insight, one more shift, one more understanding. This assumption had driven much of his movement. Now sitting quietly, he allowed himself to question it. What if nothing else was needed? This question did not arrive as a conclusion. It arrived as a pause. The traveler stayed with the feeling of waiting. He did not try to fill it. At first, the waiting felt uncomfortable. The mind wanted to move, to think, to plan. But as he stayed, something unexpected happened. The waiting softened. It revealed itself as a simple openness, an openness that did not require completion. The traveler realized that seeking had been a way of leaning forward again, a refined version of the same habit he had learned to recognize before. Instead of leaning into the future with worry, he had been leaning with hope. Hope itself was not the problem, but unconscious leaning created tension. The traveler began to notice this leaning throughout the day. While walking, he noticed the urge to arrive somewhere else, while resting the urge for a different state, while reflecting the urge for final clarity. Each time he paused, he felt the body, he felt the ground beneath him. He stayed. This staying did not feel passive, it felt complete. One evening, the traveler met someone who spoke excitedly about progress and achievement, about reaching higher states, about becoming something more. The traveler listened carefully. He noticed how the conversation stirred a familiar movement inside him. A subtle comparison, a question of whether he was doing enough. In the past, this would have gone unnoticed. Now he saw it clearly. He did not judge the feeling. He did not suppress it. He stayed present. The comparison faded. What remained was a quiet respect for the other person's path without needing to measure his own. The traveler understood now that seeking often disguised itself as self-improvement. It promised growth. It promised completion. But beneath it was the same message: this moment is not enough. Seeing this clearly brought relief. He did not need to abandon growth or learning. He only needed to release the belief that fulfillment was somewhere else. One night, as the traveler lay down to sleep, a familiar thought appeared. Perhaps tomorrow things will finally settle. He smiled gently. He noticed the thought, he noticed the leaning. Then he returned to the sensation of lying down, the support of the ground, the rhythm of breathing. The thought dissolved. The traveler saw now that peace did not arrive by accumulation. It did not arrive by reaching a final point. It arrived when the habit of seeking relaxed. This relaxation did not remove curiosity or engagement with life. It removed urgency. Life could still unfold. Understanding could still deepen, but there was no longer a sense that something essential was missing. The traveler realized that seeking had been a way of postponing presence, always preparing for a better moment instead of fully inhabiting this one. Now he allowed himself to arrive. Again and again, arriving did not mean freezing or stopping. It meant being fully here for what was happening. Walking was just walking. Resting was just resting. Listening was just listening. No extra layer was needed. As the days passed, the traveler noticed a quiet satisfaction appearing more often. Not excitement, not accomplishment, just a sense of enoughness. This enoughness did not depend on conditions. It was present even when things were imperfect, even when the mind wandered, even when emotions arose. The traveler saw that seeking had been a habit of mind, not a requirement of life. Life itself was already complete in each moment. As he continued his journey, this understanding stayed with him gently, not as a belief, not as a rule, but as a felt truth. Nothing needed to be added to this moment for it to be lived fully. Nothing needed to be reached for peace to be present. And in letting go of the habit of seeking, the traveler found himself resting more often in a simple, quiet presence that had been available all along. As the traveler continued to notice the habit of seeking, he began to recognize how deeply it was woven into ordinary moments. It did not always appear as a thought. Sometimes it appeared as a feeling, a subtle restlessness, a sense that something was unfinished. Even on peaceful days, the mind would quietly lean forward, scanning for what might complete the experience. One morning, the traveler sat beside a river, watching the water move slowly over smooth stones. The scene was calm. The body felt relaxed. And yet, there was a faint urge to do something with the moment, to reflect, to draw a conclusion, to turn the experience into meaning. The traveler noticed this urge. He did not follow it. Instead, he stayed with the simple seeing of water flowing, the sound, the movement, the light reflecting on the surface. At first, the mind resisted. It wanted to comment, to capture the moment. But as the traveler remained still, the urge softened. What remained was just the experience itself. The traveler realized that seeking often appeared as the need to add something to what was already happening. An explanation, a label, a story. Without these additions, experience felt bare, simple, and surprisingly complete. He began to practice letting moments be unfinished. When joy arose, he did not try to hold it. When calm appeared, he did not ask it to stay. When clarity emerged, he did not rush to turn it into a conclusion. He let experiences come and go. This was not indifference, it was trust. The traveler noticed how this changed his relationship with time. In the past, the present moment had often felt like a means to an end, something to move through on the way to something better. Now moments stood on their own. Waiting was just waiting. Walking was just walking. Eating was just eating. Nothing needed to lead anywhere else. One afternoon, as the traveler rested, a familiar thought appeared. If you stop seeking, will you stop growing? The question felt reasonable, even wise. The traveler noticed the feeling beneath it. A concern about stagnation, a fear of becoming passive. He stayed with the feeling. He saw that growth did not require seeking. Growth happened naturally through attention and care. Plants did not strain to grow. They responded to light, water, and soil. The traveler understood that awareness itself was a form of nourishment. By being present, learning happened, adjustment happened, seeking was not required. This realization brought relief. He did not need to push himself forward. Life would unfold through engagement, not pressure. The traveler also noticed how seeking had shaped his spiritual life. There had always been an idea of arrival, a moment when everything would finally make sense. Now that idea felt unnecessary. Understanding did not come all at once. It arrived in small, quiet shifts. Each moment of presence carried its own insight. One evening, as the traveler lay down to sleep, the mind reviewed the day. It searched for something special. Finding nothing dramatic, it felt briefly disappointed. The traveler noticed this. He smiled. He felt the body resting, the breath moving naturally. Nothing special was happening, and nothing was missing. The disappointment faded. The traveler saw that the habit of seeking was gentle but persistent. It would return again. He did not try to eliminate it forever. He simply learned to recognize it. Each recognition was a soft return to now. As days passed, the traveler noticed that life felt less divided. There was less separation between practice and living. Presence was not something he did in quiet moments only. It appeared while walking, speaking, working, resting. Not continuously, but often enough. When seeking appeared, it was met with kindness, not resistance. Oh, he would notice there is leaning again, and he would return. Return to the body, return to the senses, return to what was actually happening. This return did not feel like settling for less. It felt like arriving fully. The traveler understood now that peace was not the result of reaching a final understanding. It was the result of no longer postponing life. Each moment was sufficient. Even moments of confusion, even moments of restlessness. Nothing needed to be resolved before living could begin. As the journey continued, the traveler carried this understanding quietly, not as a rule to follow, but as a gentle orientation. When the mind leaned forward, he noticed. When it relaxed, he rested. Seeking lost its urgency. Life felt closer. And in this closeness, the traveler found a simple joy. Not a joy dependent on achievement or insight, but a joy that came from being fully present for what was already here. Again and again he discovered that nothing essential was waiting in the future. Everything he needed to live this moment was already present. And in allowing the habit of seeking to soften, the traveler found himself walking more lightly, meeting each step not as a means to an end, but as life itself unfolding right where he stood. As the urge to seek begins to fade, the natural rhythm of living becomes easier to feel. As the habit of seeking softened, the traveler began to notice another quiet change. Moments no longer felt rushed. Even when life was busy, there was a sense of space within movement. He could walk quickly without feeling hurried. He could act decisively without feeling pressured. This surprised him. For a long time, he had believed that speed and urgency were the same thing. That to move quickly, one had to feel tense. That to respond effectively, one had to feel pushed. Now he saw that this was not true. One afternoon, the traveler found himself in a situation that required immediate action. A sudden change in weather caught many people unprepared. Wind rose quickly. Dark clouds gathered. People moved with urgency, gathering their belongings, seeking shelter. The traveler moved as well. He helped where he could. He acted quickly. And yet inside, there was calm. No inner commentary, no panic. Action arose naturally, guided by awareness. Afterward, as the storm passed and calm returned, the traveler reflected on this difference. The urgency had been real, but the tension had not been necessary. He realized that much of his previous stress had not come from situations themselves, but from the inner resistance he brought to them. Resistance took many forms, wanting things to be different, arguing with what was happening, adding stories of blame or fear. Without resistance, situations were simply situations. They required response, not struggle. The traveler began to notice resistance more clearly in daily life. A delay occurred. Resistance appeared as impatience. A mistake was made. Resistance appeared as self-criticism. An uncomfortable feeling arose. Resistance appeared as avoidance. Each time the resistance added a layer of suffering. The traveler experimented gently. When resistance appeared, he did not try to eliminate it. He noticed it. He felt how resistance showed up in the body. Tightness, heat, constriction. He stayed with the sensation. Without feeding it, resistance softened. What remained was the situation itself, simpler than he had imagined. One evening, the traveler was waiting for something that did not arrive on time. In the past, this would have triggered frustration. Thoughts about wasted time would have filled his mind. This time, he noticed the first signs of resistance. The mind leaned forward. The body tightened slightly. He paused. He felt his breath. He felt his feet on the ground. Waiting was happening. Nothing else was required. The frustration faded. The traveler understood now that acceptance did not mean liking everything. It meant not adding unnecessary struggle. Acceptance was not passive. It was clear seeing. Clear seeing allowed appropriate action. If action was needed, he acted. If waiting was required, he waited. Neither needed to be accompanied by complaint. This understanding began to change how he related to discomfort. When pain arose, physical or emotional, the first impulse had always been resistance, a wish for it to end. Now he noticed that resisting pain often made it worse. Pain plus resistance became suffering. Pain without resistance was still pain, but it was workable. One night, the traveler experienced physical discomfort that made sleep difficult. In the past, he would have tossed and turned frustrated. This time, he stayed present. He felt the discomfort directly. He noticed where it was strongest, where it softened. He did not demand that it go away. Eventually, sleep came. Not because the pain disappeared completely, but because resistance had ended. The traveler realized that resistance was a habit of mind, not a requirement of life. And like all habits, it could be seen. Seeing resistance did not make life effortless, but it made it simpler. Events happened, responses followed. There was less inner conflict. As days passed, the traveler noticed a growing trust in life. Not blind trust that everything would go well, but trust that whatever arose could be met. This trust did not come from control. It came from experience. Again and again he saw that letting go of resistance did not make him weak. It made him responsive. He could say no when needed. He could set boundaries. He could take action. But he no longer fought reality as it unfolded. As evening came, the traveler rested quietly. Thoughts appeared as always. Some suggested improvement. Some replayed events. He noticed them. No resistance was required. They came. They went. The traveler understood now that peace was not found by removing challenges from life. It was found by removing unnecessary resistance to them. Life would continue to present difficulty and ease, change and uncertainty. But without resistance, each moment became lighter, and as the journey continued, the traveler walked forward with a new understanding. He did not need life to be different to be at peace. He needed only to meet it as it was, with clarity, responsiveness, and a willingness to let go of the struggle that had once made everything heavier than it needed to be. As the traveler continued to live with less resistance, he began to notice how deeply the habit of arguing with reality had once shaped his days. Even small events had triggered inner debates. Why did this happen? Why now? Why to me? These questions had felt unnatural, even intelligent. Now they felt unnecessary. One morning, the traveler set out to walk a familiar path, only to find it blocked. A fallen tree lay across the way, forcing him to stop. In the past, this would have sparked irritation. Plans would have been disrupted. Time would have felt wasted. This time he noticed the first flicker of resistance, a tightening, a subtle complaint forming. He paused. He felt the ground beneath his feet. He looked at the tree. The path was blocked. Nothing more needed to be added. He chose another route. The situation resolved itself without struggle. The traveler saw that resistance always came with a story, a narrative about how things should be. When the story was believed, suffering followed. When the story was seen as just a thought, flexibility returned. This understanding deepened his trust. He no longer needed life to follow a specific script. He could respond to what was actually happening. The traveler also noticed how resistance often hid behind righteousness, a feeling of being right. a sense of justification. When someone acted carelessly, resistance appeared as blame. When things went wrong, resistance appeared as judgment. These reactions felt solid and convincing. Now he watched them carefully. One afternoon, someone spoke sharply to him. The words carried irritation. Immediately, a response arose. Defensiveness, a story about fairness. The traveler noticed the heat in the chest. The urge to respond. He did not suppress it. He stayed present. The words passed. The moment moved on. Later, he reflected. If he had followed the resistance, the moment would have grown. By not feeding it, it dissolved. This did not mean he accepted unkindness. It meant he did not multiply it. The traveler saw that letting go of resistance created room for wiser action. Sometimes that action was silence. Sometimes it was speaking clearly. Sometimes it was leaving. Resistance had once clouded these choices. Without it, clarity emerged. He also noticed that resistance often appeared strongest when the self-image felt threatened, when identity was involved. Without clinging to a fixed self, resistance lost much of its fuel. The traveler began to feel lighter in situations that had once felt heavy. He could admit mistakes without shame. He could change plans without frustration. He could listen without defending. Life felt more fluid. One evening, as the traveler rested, a familiar ache of longing appeared, a desire for things to be settled once and for all. He noticed it. There was the ache, and there was awareness of the ache. He did not push it away. He did not indulge it. He allowed it to be felt. The ache softened. The traveler understood now that resistance was not an enemy. It was a signal that something was being argued with. When resistance appeared, it was an invitation to look more closely. What is being resisted? What story is being believed? Seeing this was enough. The traveler no longer expected resistance to disappear forever. He expected to notice it sooner. Each noticing reduced its grip. As night came, the traveler lay down to sleep. Thoughts appeared as always. Some replayed events. Some imagined the future. He did not resist them. He let them move through awareness. Sleep arrived naturally. The traveler rested knowing that a resistance would return at times, and knowing that each return was simply another opportunity to let go. Life did not need to be controlled to be lived well. It needed to be met. With each step forward, the traveler felt more at ease with uncertainty, more willing to respond rather than react. And in this willingness, he found a peace that was not fragile because it did not depend on things going a certain way. It depended only on the simple act of noticing when resistance appeared and choosing again and again to meet life without the extra weight of arguing with what already was. As this story gently comes to rest, there is nothing left to follow, nothing left to understand. The day can loosen its grip now. Thoughts can drift where they wish. The body knows how to soften on its own. If you're listening from the quiet of your room, from the edge of sleep, or from somewhere deep inside, the night, know that you do not need to stay awake for this. You can let the words fade. You can let the silence take over. Here in the long night, there is no destination to reach, no lesson to remember, only the simple permission to rest. May your breathing slow naturally. May your shoulders release. May the mind settle without effort. And if sleep comes, let it come gently. If it does not, that is also okay. Nothing more is required. Thank you for sharing this quiet time. Wherever you are, whatever this night holds for you, may it be calm, may it be kind. Good night. Sleep well.